Chapter 26-21. Dao Root Yarrow Xiangjuan's pupils shrank. It was a good thing her mind wasn't bad, so she calmed herself down and replied in a voice filled with disbelief, "This. How is this possible? It's very hard to prove one's Dao in the 8 heaven domains. Did Sakyamuni really succeed? It's definitely true. My perception is quite sharp, and when I came to the temple, I could feel a trace of Dao aura from Sakyamuni. This Dao aura is much stronger than a half-step heavenly Dao master," Mu Chunxue said in a serious voice. Yarrow Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes focused as she revealed a bitter look. She had relied on the heaven domain's spring white snow to increase her cultivation by leaps and bounds, reaching the peak of the life and death realm. Although she was not as strong as Sakyamuni, at least the gap between them was not that big. But she never would have thought that Sakyamuni would succeed. She knew that with her current strength, she could not compare to Sakyamuni at all. Then what should we do? With Sakyamuni's personality, he'll probably make a move after the temple conference. Yarrow Xiangjuan was a bit panicked. Mu Chunxue calmly said, "Little sister Xiangjuan, do you believe me? If you're willing to believe me, then follow me after the conference." Yarrow Xiangjuan looked up and met Mu Chunxue's calm eyes. Her panicked heart calmed down a bit as she said with a strong nod, "Big sister Chen Shui, I believe you." Mu Chunxue revealed a faint smile, "You can just follow me when the time comes. Let's listen to what the envoy has to say." Yarrow Xiangjuan nodded and did not send any more sound transmissions. She just silently sat in front of the table. "Is there no one from the Hua Xia heaven domain coming?" After waiting for a while, Sun Qi was a bit impatient as he coldly said. Sakyamuni also knit his brows. Hua Xia heaven domain's Tai Ching had always been a large worry in his heart. Now that he had proven his Dao and his strength had increased, he naturally hoped to meet Tai Ching again and fight with him. Sakyamuni was brimming with confidence, and he wasn't particularly fearful of his greatest enemy. He believed that even if Tai Ching had a powerful trump card, the difference in cultivation couldn't be made up for by trump cards. This time, he planned to trample Tai Ching under his feet. Sun Qi waited for a while, but his face became more and more unsightly. Then he stopped waiting and walked to the main seat of the table, saying coldly, "It seems that the Tianyuan realm of Hua Xia wants to test my patience. Well, since no one from the Tianyuan realm of Hua Xia is coming, then forget it. I'll tell you first." Everyone at the table looked at each other, some of them gloating in their hearts. They knew that the 3 liquidators of the heaven realm of Huaxia had thoroughly offended this emissary. This emissary was a genuine Dao-confirming powerhouse. If such a powerhouse was angered, it would be very terrifying. Sakyamuni frowned slightly. He had interacted with Tai Ching the most and more or less understood his personality. If Tai Ching had received Sun Qi's invitation, it was impossible for him not to come. After all, Tai Ching was more cunning and scheming than him. It was impossible for him to do such a stupid thing. But the reality was that no one from the Tianyuan realm of Hua Xia came. I think everyone has heard of the heavenly moat. On the other side of the heavenly moat is the 9th heaven, which is called the Xian Mi heavenly domain. Maybe you don't know that in addition to the Xian Mi heavenly domain, there is an extremely powerful heavenly domain called the prehistoric heavenly domain. There is no human race in the prehistoric heavenly domain, but there are many non-human races, such as the Devouring Clan, the Witch Clan, and so on. And this time, I came to the 8 heavenly domains for the prehistoric heavenly domain. Next, Sun Qi began to patiently explain the dangers of the Xian Mi heavenly domain and the prehistoric heavenly domain. In the 6 desires heavenly domain of the 8 heavenly domains, there was a gap between the prehistoric heavenly domain and the 8 heavenly domains. At this moment, this gap was still sealed, but if it was opened, then countless terrifying races from the prehistoric heavenly domain would descend, and the 8 heavenly domains would be utterly unable to stop the terrifying races from the prehistoric heavenly domain. After all, in the prehistoric heavenly domain and Xian Mi heavenly domain, the void heaven realm was the lowest level of existence, and Dao affirmation realm ferocious beasts could be found everywhere. Once the prehistoric heavenly domain invaded, then the 8 heavenly domains would be utterly unable to stop it, and they would be annihilated in a short period of time. The reason Sun Qi had come to notify the rulers of the 8 heavenly domains was to take away the humans in the 8 heavenly domains that possessed Tao roots. After all, even though the 8 heavenly domains were extremely barren of energy, there were quite a number of humans, so perhaps a few extremely talented geniuses would appear. Sakyamuni was the best example. Sun Qi knew that it would be slightly difficult to recruit Sakyamuni. After all, Sakyamuni's cultivation was on par with his own, and the latter was extremely ambitious, so he might look down on the White Rainbow Hall. However, it was very easy to recruit those cultivators that were still weak. The Xian Mi Heavenly Domains cultivation system was much more complete than the 8 heavenly domains, and it was much more advanced. In the Xian Mi Heavenly Domain, once a cultivator's cultivation reached the heavenly god realm, they would be able to roughly determine their future accomplishments and whether they would be able to smoothly attain the Tao. Because in the Xian Mi Heavenly Domain, all the cultivators that were able to smoothly attain the Tao possessed Tao roots within their bodies, and Tao roots could give birth to Tao veins that allowed them to continue cultivating after attaining the Tao. Tao veins could absorb the quintessence of the heavenly Tao and refine it into their own Tao aura, allowing them to become one with the heavenly Tao in battle and be able to borrow the energy of the heavenly Tao at will. It was precisely because they could borrow the energy of the heavenly Tao at any time that they were on a completely different level from cultivators below the Tao affirmation realm. This was also the reason why Tao affirmation realm experts were extremely rare in the 8 heavenly domains. Because the 8 heavenly domains didn't have a systematic method to test their Tao roots, and they didn't know how to unearth true geniuses. Coupled with the fact that the 8 heavenly domains were barren of star energy. If one wanted to cultivate and attain the Tao in the 8 heavenly domains, then it was simply 1 in a million, and the probability was simply too small. Which one of you is willing to follow me to the Xian Mi heavenly domain? But let's make a deal first. I'll only take cultivators with Tao roots, and I won't take cultivators without Tao roots. Sun Qi spoke in a deep voice. Cough cough. Emissary Sun, according to what you said, the Xian Mi heavenly domain can determine whether a cultivator has the talent to attain the Tao in advance, but we still have some doubts. Why don't you demonstrate it for us to see? Old man Qing Shui coughed and spoke. The others revealed curious expressions as well. This was the first time they'd heard of Tao roots. In their countless years of cultivation, the 8 heavenly domains had judged a cultivator's talent by their cultivation speed. Those who cultivated quickly naturally had high talent, and those who cultivated slowly naturally had low talent. Sakyamuni revealed a curious expression as well. This was the first time he'd heard of Tao roots as well, and he really wanted to see if any of them possessed Tao roots. Mu Chunxue and Yaro Xiangjuan revealed curious expressions as well. Sun Qi flicked his finger and took out an irregular crystal from his spirit ring. Chapter 26-22. Testing the Tao root. Tao roots are divided into grades as well, and they're respectively heaven, earth, dark, and yellow. The highest grade is the heaven grade Tao root, and the lowest is the yellow grade Tao root. It's practically impossible for those without Tao roots to attain the Tao, said Sun Qi indifferently. You go first. Sun Qi pointed at the old man as he spoke. It was this old man who'd suggested testing the Tao root. Even though the old man seemed to be old and weak, he was extremely interested in testing the Tao root. So, he stood up while a trace of spirit appeared in his muddy eyes. Place your right hand on the testing stone, said Sun Qi. The old man nodded and placed his right hand on the crystal. After that, Sun Qi started to chant, and then the translucent and crystalline testing stone started to change. The crystal emanated a trace of yellow light. However, the yellow light was extremely weak, and it was like the afterglow of dusk. It was filled with the aura of someone past their prime. It's barely in Tao root, but it's very weak. It can probably only be called a pseudo-Tao root. Sun Qi's indifferent voice resounded while his gaze carried disdain. Pseudo-Tao roots could be found everywhere in the Xian Mi heavenly region. It was very difficult for cultivators that possessed pseudo-Tao roots to attain the Tao by themselves unless a great figure spent a great deal of effort to help them attain the Tao by force. However, this was an arduous and unrewarding task. After a cultivator with a pseudo-Tao root was forcefully attained by a great figure, their cultivation would forever remain at the Heaven Tao Lord realm, and they would be unable to advance in their entire lifetime, let alone break through. However, Sun Qi didn't reveal his disdain. After all, the old man was the person in charge of the Tusita heavenly region. If Sun Qi wanted to recruit people from the Tusita heavenly region, then he had to rely on the old man's ability to rally people. The old man frowned when he saw the results of the test. Obviously, he wasn't satisfied with the results. It was obvious that the old man's natural talent was very ordinary, and it was probably very difficult for him to attain the Tao. After that, Sun Qi went to test the Tao roots of the three people in charge of the Boundless Radiance heavenly region, Yemor heavenly region, and Mahesvara heavenly region. He noticed that they were only slightly stronger than the old man and had barely attained the yellow-grade Tao root. Let me give it a try. Yarou Shangjuan was very interested and started to test it as well. The crystal suddenly emitted a blazing yellow light, and when the yellow light reached its peak, it suddenly changed into a cyan color. Although the green light wasn't as intense as the yellow light, it was still dazzling enough. Sun Qi's eyes lit up, and he gazed at Yarou Shangjuan with pleasant surprise as he said, "It's actually a profound grade ancestral Tao root. Miss Yarou, it's truly a waste of your natural talent not to head to the Dark Valley heavenly region. Come back with me, and my White Rainbow Hall will definitely place emphasis on fostering you. In the future, your cultivation will at least be at the level of Lord Chaotic, and perhaps you'll be able to break through to the second step of the Tao validation." Yarou Shangjuan's beautiful eyes were also filled with excitement, but she quickly calmed down and said, "If you can help me kill Sakyamuni, why can't I follow you back to the White Rainbow Hall in the Shen-Mi heavenly region?" Sun Qi's brows knit together tightly. Sakyamuni was the person he thought highly of the most. As far as he was concerned, Sakyamuni's ancestral Tao root was at least at the profound grade, and he naturally didn't want to miss the opportunity to recruit such a genius, let alone deal with Sakyamuni. Yarou Shangjuan noticed Sun Qi's dilemma as well, and she grunted coldly before sitting back down without saying a word. Sun Qi was slightly helpless, yet his gaze descended onto Mu Chunxue, and there was a different expression in the depths of his eyes. "Miss Mo, would you like to take the test as well?" asked Sun Qi. Mu Chunxue refused resolutely. "There's no need. I'm clearly aware of whether I possess a spirit vein or not." Sun Qi glanced deeply at Mu Chunxue, yet he didn't force her. He looked at Sakyamuni instead because amongst all of them, he was actually the one who looked forward to Sakyamuni's ancestral Tao root the most. "I'll take the test as well." Sakyamuni nodded, and then he walked over to Sun Qi and covered the crystal with his right palm. In just an instant, yellow light shot into the sky, and then the yellow light swiftly changed into green light. Moreover, the green light grew more and more dazzling, and it even surpassed the intensity of the green light Yarou Shangjuan emitted during her test. Sun Qi's eyes lit up, and then he noticed to his pleasant surprise that the bright light suddenly shot into the sky and slowly turned brown. Only when the color had completely turned brown did the light slowly recede. Sakyamuni frowned slightly. The crystal had only changed color 3 times, yet ancestral Tao roots had 4 grades. In other words, his ancestral Tao root could only be considered to be an earthly grade ancestral Tao root, and it hadn't attained the heavenly grade. However, Sun Qi was truly shocked. He hadn't expected that Sakyamuni's natural talent would be so formidable and actually possess an earthly grade ancestral Tao root. After all, earthly grade ancestral Tao roots were 100% capable of stepping into the second step of the Tao advancement so long as one didn't perish on the way. "I must take this fellow into the White Rainbow Hall, no matter the cost." Sun Qi's eyes revealed a wisp of bright light, and his gaze towards Sakyamuni grew even brighter. At the same time, there was a wisp of gloominess in his gaze. He was very clearly aware that he'd already occupied the initiative when he came to the 8 great heavens this time, and he was absolutely unwilling to let such a genius like Sakyamuni slip by. If She was taken by another power, then it would absolutely be a huge loss to the White Rainbow Hall. He'd decided to invite Sakyamuni again. If Sakyamuni didn't know what was good for him, then he could only make a move and annihilate Sakyamuni. After all, annihilating such a genius with his own hands was better than falling into the hands of another power. Sakyamuni's perception was extremely acute, and he'd sensed Sun Chi's killing intent at the instant he revealed it. Sakyamuni thought for a moment and understood Sun Chi's thoughts at this moment. Sakyamuni, so long as you agree to join the White Rainbow Hall, then I promise that you'll definitely become the successor of the White Rainbow Hall in the future. Besides that, I've already sent a message to our Hall Master regarding your matters, and is willing to make you the successor. Sun Chi suppressed the excitement in his heart and extended another invitation to Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni fell into silence. He was very clearly aware that if he refused again, then he would stand on the opposite side of Sun Chi, and that was absolutely unwise. After all, he'd just attained the Tao, and his cultivation hadn't stabilized. Moreover, Sun Chi had attained the Tao much longer than him, and Sun Chi possessed many trump cards. If they really fought, then Sakyamuni knew that he wasn't a match for Sun Chi at this moment. Sakyamuni was silent for a moment, but then he smiled and said, "I'm honored to join the White Rainbow Hall." Sun Chi was startled. He didn't expect Sakyamuni, who'd tactfully refused him before, to agree so readily now. He was overjoyed and didn't think about the contrast between Sakyamuni's attitude before and after. Haha. Sakyamuni, don't worry, if you join our White Rainbow Hall, we'll do our best to cultivate you in the future and help you step into the second step of Tao validation as soon as possible. Sun Chi laughed. Sakyamuni just nodded slightly, but then he looked at Mu Chunxue and Yarou Shangjuan and said with a smile, "Senior brother Sun, when the time comes, you're welcome to come to the Sakyamuni domain to recruit people, but before that, I may have to deal with some grievances." Sun Chi was startled, but he quickly recovered and looked at Mu Chunxue and Yarou Shangjuan and said with a smile, "Do you need my help?" Sakyamuni grinned and said, "There's no need to trouble senior brother Sun with such trivial matters." Yarou Shangjuan and Mu Chenshue's expressions changed drastically. They didn't expect such a thing to happen. Looking at Sun Chi's appearance, they were afraid that he was going to help Sakyamuni. Chapter 26-23. The Phoenix Bloodline Emissary Sun, this isn't right, right? It was you who invited us here. Is this how you treat your guests? Mu Chunxue spoke rather calmly. Yarou Shangjuan even said furiously, "Emissary Sun, you're being biased." A wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of Sun Chi's mouth, and he said indifferently, "Young missus, I didn't make a move, and I'm just keeping watch for the two of you. This divine temple is an ancient ruin after all. What if the two of you accidentally destroy this divine temple?" As he spoke, Sun Chi flicked his sleeve, and a terrifying energy of the Tao surged out explosively and instantly enveloped the entire divine temple. Mu Chunxue and Yarou Shangjuan's beautiful faces turned gloomy when they sensed this energy of the Tao enveloping them. Sun Chi was a peak expert at the Heaven Tao Lord realm after all, and he was able to mobilize the energy of the Heaven Tao. The energy of the Heaven Tao that covered the surroundings of the divine temple was extremely formidable, and they might not be able to blast it open even if they joined forces. Sakyamuni glanced at Sun Chi as well. Merely this move of Sun Chi's was something he was unable to accomplish. Moreover, he was able to sense that the energy of the Heaven Tao that Sun Chi grasped was much stronger than him. However, Sakyamuni didn't feel dejected. After he found out that his ancestral Tao root was an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root, he knew that he was a genius even in Xian Mi Heaven region. So long as he headed to Xian Mi Heaven region, he was very clearly aware that he would be able to surpass Sun Chi with ease, and he would be able to attain a state that even Sun Chi had to look up to in the end. Merely based on the importance Sun Chi attached to him, it was obvious how rare and formidable his ancestral Tao root was. Sun Chi glanced at Mu Chunxue and Yarou Shangjuan with slight pity instead. These two women's appearances were extremely rare even in the Xian Mi heavenly domain. Moreover, these two women's Tao roots were not bad. Unfortunately, Sakyamuni, who possessed an even higher grade ancestral Tao root, had chosen his Baihong Hall, and there was enmity between Sakyamuni and these two women. So, it was naturally impossible for Sun Chi to help these two women, nor did he intend to take them into his Baihong Hall. After all, now that he had a better choice, he could naturally abandon these two women at any time. He just felt that it was a pity. When Elder Qing Laro and the other three saw this scene, they were all shocked and bewildered. Especially when they realized that Sun Chi had used the power of the Way of the Heavens to seal the temple, the four of them were even more terrified. Facing a Tao-confirming powerhouse, the four of them didn't have the slightest courage to resist. The four of you, come to my side. How about we leave together after the three of them have settled their grudges? Sun Qi said with a smile. Elder Qing Laro and the other three naturally didn't have any objections. They gathered around Sun Qi and stared fixedly at Sakyamuni, Mu Chunxue, and Yarou Shangjuan. They had a feeling that Sakyamuni wasn't simple. Especially when Sakyamuni stood up, the Daoist rhyme emanated was extremely powerful. Even though it wasn't as powerful as Sun Qi's, it wasn't too far off. Could it be that Sakyamuni has succeeded? Elder Qing Laro was surprised and bewildered as he muttered with a frown on his face. Sakyamuni, you killed Palace Master Wujue and destroyed my Six Desires Palace for no reason. You're truly too ruthless. Palace Master Jingyun glared at Sakyamuni furiously. Sakyamuni sneered and casually slapped out a palm towards Palace Master Jingyun. Even though the golden palm was only around 3 meters in size, the aura on it was extremely terrifying. Especially the Daoist rhyme that emanated from it, it seemed to be able to affect one's mind. Palace Master Jingyun's expression changed drastically. She actually trembled in front of the golden palm and couldn't muster up any thoughts of resistance. Uncle Master Jingyun, watch out! Yarou Shangjuan cried out and stood in front of Jingyun. She formed a seal with her jade-like hands and slapped the empty space. Immediately, the empty space distorted and surged out like a torrent, smashing against the golden palm. Boom! The golden palm was stopped by this invisible force for a moment. However, it was quickly crushed by the invisible force and continued to attack Yarou Shangjuan. Yarou Shangjuan gritted her teeth and her entire body was wrapped in milky white energy. Then, the milky white light condensed and turned into a 3-foot-6-inch guqin. This guqin was the Heavenly Domain's heavenly domain source, spring white snow. Dong. Yarou Shangjuan's jade-like hands gently plucked the strings of the guqin. Waves of guqin music surged out and slammed into the golden palm. Then, Yarou Shangjuan kept plucking the strings of the guqin. The waves of guqin music were more terrifying and powerful than the previous one, and Yarou Shangjuan kept retreating. When she retreated nearly 100 steps, she stepped on the ground and plucked the strings of the guqin again. Suddenly, the guqin music was earth-shattering. Like a violent storm, it slammed into the golden palm. The golden palm, which had been weakened by the guqin music again and again, completely collapsed into countless golden light spots under the last wave of guqin music. Yarou Shangjuan's face was pale, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her beautiful eyes were full of horror. She didn't expect that Sakyamuni's casual move would force her to use all her strength to barely block it. You have indeed succeeded in proving your way, Yarou Shangjuan said gloomily. Palace Master Jingyun hurried to Yarou Shangjuan with an apologetic look in her eyes. At the same time, she also regretted it. If she had known that Sakyamuni had already proven his way, she wouldn't have asked Yarou Shangjuan to accept Sun Qi's invitation. Yarou Shangjuan comforted her softly, indicating that this matter didn't matter. At this moment, Mu Chunxue came to Yarou Shangjuan's side and asked, "Little sister Shangjuan, are you alright?" Yarou Shangjuan forced a smile and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little injured. It's nothing serious." Mu Chunxue shook her head. Although Yarou Shangjuan's injuries didn't seem serious, Mu Chunxue could sense that Yarou Shangjuan's injuries weren't light. She had already suffered serious internal injuries. "Uezu, Magatama, the two of you take little sister Shangjuan and retreat," Mu Chunxue said in a deep voice. Uezu and Magatama, who had been following behind Mu Chunxue, exchanged glances. Both of them could see the worry in their eyes. Although they knew that Mu Chunxue's cultivation was very high and she was very strong, as far as they knew, Mu Chunxue was only a half-step Heavenly Tao Master. She was still half a step away from becoming a Heavenly Tao Master. Although it was only half a step, it was like a heavenly moat that was unreachable. They didn't know that Yarou Shangjuan could barely take a casual move from Sakyamuni. They knew that Mu Chunxue was stronger than Yarou Shangjuan, but no matter how strong she wasn't a true Heavenly Tao Master. However, this was Mu Chunxue's order after all, so they had no choice but to obey. Big sister Chen Shui isn't Sakyamuni's match. I'll go with big sister Chen Shui, Yarou Xiangjuan quickly said. However, as soon as Yarou Xiangjuan finished speaking, she looked at Mu Chunshue's back in front of her in shock. She saw that Mu Chunshue's body was surrounded by flowing flames. Following the clear cry of a phoenix, Mu Chunshue's aura began to increase, becoming more and more terrifying. The flowing flames quickly moved around Mu Chunshue's body. It was like a cycle of reincarnation, condensing into the image of a phoenix. Mu Chunshue was inside the fire phoenix. It was like she was wearing a beautiful coat of fire phoenix. She suddenly soared into the sky and charged at Sakyamuni. Chapter 26-24. A sword soared through the sky. Sakyamuni was surprised by Mu Chunshue's aura that had suddenly risen explosively. This aura was so strong that it was practically on par with his own aura. What's going on with Mu Chunshue? How many years has it been since we last met? She's actually changed so much. Sakyamuni thought in his heart as he took a step forward. Golden light erupted from his entire body, and he seemed like a golden statue that was covered in golden armor. Rumble. Sakyamuni instantly flashed over, and his fist was like a rainbow that shot through the sky, and it smashed towards Mu Chunshue's chest. Mu Chunshue's beautiful eyes were cold while flames flowed throughout her body. She opened her palm and lightly stretched it out. The flames that covered her palm possessed an extremely terrifying temperature, and the surrounding air was scorched to the point of being distorted and collapsed. Bang! Their attacks collided, and it caused a terrifying airflow to arise. Space collapsed endlessly, and strong winds swept through the surroundings like the sharpest blade. The entire Hu Divine Temple shook violently under the terrifying wave of air, and it seemed like it would collapse at any moment. The four of them let out muffled groans as they retreated incessantly, and they directly retreated to the edge of the temple. If it wasn't for the barrier that Sun Qi had set up at the edge of the temple, all four of them would have been blasted out of the temple. It wasn't just the old man. The four of them on Yarou Xiangjuan's side were in an extremely sorry state as well. Only Sun Qi stood on the spot without moving with his hands behind his back, and he stared unblinkingly at the battle before him. Sakyamuni and Mu Chunshue each took over 10 steps back, and both of them revealed solemn expressions. I underestimated you. Your cultivation is at most at the half-step heavenly Tao Lord, but the bloodline in your body isn't ordinary, and it's actually capable of improving your combat strength to such a terrifying extent. Sakura spoke coldly. Mu Chunshue's beautiful eyes were cold as she said, I didn't expect you to have successfully attained your Tao. Originally, I came here with the intention of killing you, but I didn't expect such an unforeseen event to occur. Sakyamuni laughed and said, my goal is similar to yours. I came here to kill that Zhuoan. Unfortunately, not only is that guy a coward, he even asked a woman to stand up for him. Calling him a coward is too apartment. You're not allowed to insult my husband. You're courting death. Mu Chunshue's beautiful eyes were filled with killing intent. She stomped her foot and swept toward Sakyamuni like a waterfall across the sky. The Phoenix Phantom let out a deafening and clear cry. Invisible sound waves spread out and actually affected the barrier set up by Sun Qi. Bang bang bang! Sakyamuni and Mu Chunshue fought once more, and the aftershock from their battle grew more and more terrifying. It actually affected the entire Hu Divine Temple and the barrier in the surroundings. On the other hand, Yarou Xiangjuan and the others resisted the aftershock with great difficulty, and they watched with shock as the battle between Mu Chunshue and Sakyamuni continued. How formidable! Yarou Xiangjuan gazed at Mu Chunshue's figure with shock. She hadn't expected that Zhuowen's Tao companion would actually be so formidable. She'd seen Zhuowen fight in the past, and the gap between Zhuowen and Mu Chunshue wasn't just a little bit. Of course, Yarou Xiangjuan hadn't seen Zhuowen for a very long time, so she was naturally unaware that Zhuowen's strength had advanced by leaps and bounds during this period of time. Especially Zhuowen's King Devourer, his strength had arrived at a freakish state. Crack! Suddenly, countless cracks appeared on the surface of Hu Divine Temple, and even the barrier around it started to shatter and collapse. Rumble! The Hu Divine Temple finally couldn't withstand the battle between Sakyamuni and Yarou Xiangjuan, and it completely collapsed. The barrier around it was also completely shattered. Qingju and the others quickly escaped from the Hu Divine Temple, and they looked at the ruins of the Hu Divine Temple with lingering fear. Yarou Xiangjuan had already led Jingyun, Yuezhu, and Magatama out of the Hu Divine Temple in advance. Bang! After the 8 of them left the Hu Divine Temple, the ruins of the Hu Divine Temple suddenly exploded, and Mu Chunxue and Sakyamuni fought like ferocious beasts again. It was an earth-shattering battle, and the sun and moon seemed to have lost their light. The battle was extremely terrifying. Sun Qi waved his hand, and the ruins above were easily dispersed by him. He quietly watched the battle between Mu Chunxue and Sakyamuni, and his eyes flickered, as if he was weighing something. Boom! Mu Chunxue and Sakyamuni separated again, and the contempt on Sakyamuni's face was no longer present. He looked deeply at Mu Chunxue, and said, "Mu Chunxue, your strength is not bad, and you are qualified to receive my strongest attack. Once I've killed you, I'll naturally go look for Zhuo Wen and kill him as well, so as to avoid future troubles." At this point, Sakyamuni's killing intent soared to the sky, and immediately, behind Sakyamuni, golden rings of light appeared, densely packed, and there were thousands of them. From these golden rings of light, various powerful divine weapons flew out, and each of them was shining with a golden light, and it was difficult to look at them directly. Thousands of golden divine weapons rushed towards Mu Chunxue like a flood. From afar, it looked like a golden river, and it was extremely magnificent. Mu Chunxue was not to be outdone. The phoenix silhouette on her grew even more solid, and then Mu Chunxue stepped into the air, and terrifying flames spread in all directions, immediately turning into a sea of fire. Bang! 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 The golden river collided with the boundless sea of fire, and dazzling sparks erupted. Sakyamuni sneered. He formed a seal with both hands, and suddenly pointed with his right hand. Immediately, the golden river pierced through the sea of fire like a rainbow, and directly blasted towards Mu Chunxue's heart. Mu Chunxue's expression changed slightly, but she did not panic. Instead, she pointed at her forehead with her right hand, and the mark of a flaming phoenix appeared on her forehead. Afterwards, the boundless sea of fire in the surroundings actually began to change, and formed silhouettes of phoenixes. Although these silhouettes of phoenixes were much smaller than the ones on Mu Chunxue's body, their power could not be underestimated. The silhouettes of phoenixes were like moths to a flame, and they completely blocked the terrifying attack of the Golden River. Sakyamuni frowned slightly, and snorted coldly. He took a step forward, and followed the Golden River into the sea of fire. Afterwards, he formed a seal with his right hand, and shouted, "Condense!" The silhouettes of golden divine weapons fused together, and in the end, they landed in Sakyamuni's hand. At a closer look, the weapon in Sakyamuni's hand shone with golden light, and it seemed like a sword, but it was not a sword. The hilt of the weapon was golden, but the blade was blood red, and the blade was covered in dense runes. "This is the Emperor sword that I have refined for countless years, and after fusing with countless void sky divine weapons, it finally took shape. The moment I confirmed my Tao, it also comprehended its own Tao, and became a Tao-confirming divine weapon. Today, I will use you as a sacrifice to my sword." Sakyamuni gently stroked the divine sword in his hand, and then with a wave of his hand, the silhouettes of phoenixes that surged towards him were instantly destroyed. Bang! 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 Sakyamuni swung his sword again and again, and all the silhouettes of phoenixes in front of him could not stop his sword at all. A sword across the sky, and there was nothing it could not destroy. Chapter 26-25. I'm here to kill you. This is bad, big sister Chen Shui. Yarou Xiangjuan saw this scene and couldn't help calling out. Yuezhu and Magatama both revealed looks of worry. The strength Sakyamuni displayed was too terrifying. They were all worried that Mu Chunxue wouldn't be able to block Sakyamuni's strongest attack. Mu Chen Shui knitted her brows as a solemn expression appeared in her beautiful eyes. Soon after, she clenched her jade-like hand. Immediately, the surrounding phoenix phantoms merged into her body, causing the phoenix phantoms on her body to become even more solid and powerful. Peng! When Sakyamuni's sword slashed down, the aura of the phoenix phantoms reached its strongest point. Flames and golden light intertwined and a terrifying light filled the entire starry sky. Mu Chunxue and Sakyamuni's figures were covered in this light and no one could tell who had won or lost. However, the moment the light surged out, Sun Qi's eyes burst out with an intense light. Immediately after, he stomped his right foot and quietly swept into the light. At this moment, in the center of the light, Mu Chunxue and Sakyamuni were in a difficult stalemate. Sakyamuni's brows tightly knit. He never thought that Mu Chunxue would be this strong. He had already used his strongest attack, but he had only gained the upper hand. He still wasn't strong enough to defeat Mu Chunxue. Yuan. Sakyamuni seemed to have sensed something. He looked to the side and saw a figure quickly flying over. Then a palm flew out and slammed towards Mu Chunxue. When Mu Chunxue sensed this palm, her expression completely changed. She wanted to pull out her hand to block this palm, but it was a pity that she was in a stalemate with Sakyamuni and couldn't pull out her hand at all. In the end, Mu Chunxue could only watch as the palm broke through her defense and landed on her chest. However, Mu Chunxue also moved her body at the last moment. The palm that was originally on her chest finally landed on her shoulder. Poochie. The powerful Daoist rhyme stirred inside Mu Chunxue's body like a meat grinder. Then, Mu Chunxue flew out like a leaf. When the light completely disappeared, Yarou Xiangjuan and the others saw Mu Chunxue's figure flying out. Then, they saw a stalwart figure standing beside Sakyamuni. This figure was Sun Qi. Despicable. When Yarou Xiangjuan saw this scene, she immediately thought of what had just happened. She stomped her foot and rushed towards Mu Chunxue, trying to catch Mu Chunxue's body. At this moment, all the meridians in Mu Chunxue's body were being attacked by Sun Qi's Daoist rhyme. Her body was weak and she couldn't move at all. If Sakyamuni gave her another blow, she would definitely die. Sakyamuni just looked at Sun Qi coldly and didn't say anything. Instead, he held the divine sword in his right hand and casually slashed at Mu Chunxue. The blood-red sword light mixed with gold rushed towards Mu Chunxue. With Sakyamuni's eyesight, he could naturally see that Mu Chunxue was defenseless at this moment. His casual slash was enough to kill Mu Chunxue. Unrelated people, don't interfere in this battle. Scram. Sun Qi looked indifferently at Yarou Xiangjuan who was rushing over. With a wave of his sleeve, a vast power surged out. Yarou Xiangjuan's face changed greatly. She could only summon the spring snow of the sky domain's origin to barely block the attack. However, she was also hit by the terrifying aftershock and vomited blood. Mu Chunxue's face was pale. Looking at the approaching sword light, the corner of her mouth revealed a trace of bitterness. In the end, I still miscalculated a step. This time, I came to the Hu Temple too impulsively. I don't know if my husband will blame me for acting on my own initiative and being too willful. Mu Chunxue sighed softly. She thought of Zhuowen's figure. In fact, the thing she wanted to do the most now wasn't to avoid the sword light, but to see Zhuowen's figure again. Boom. The moment the sword light rushed over, it was intercepted by a grey light. Immediately after, a brilliant light burst out. Sakyamuni's eyes narrowed. Only then did he see the true face of the grey light. It was actually a grey divine sword. The grey divine sword's surface flowed with Daoist rhymes. Its aura was even stronger than the divine sword in Sakyamuni's hand. Clearly, it was also a divine weapon. Who is it? Sakyamuni said coldly. Whoosh. Just as Sakyamuni finished speaking, a stream of light rushed over as if it had traveled through time and space. In an instant, it landed beside Mu Chunxue. A young man in white walked down from the space-time roulette. His right arm was tightly wrapped around Mu Chunxue. His eyes were filled with intense killing intent. Mu Chunxue stared blankly at the young man in white in front of her. She cried tears of joy and said, "Husband, you actually came here?" Zhuowen sighed softly. Looking at the injuries on Mu Chunxue's body, his eyes became gloomier. His right hand formed a sword and pointed at the acupoints all over Mu Chunxue's body. He forcefully guided out the Daoist rhymes that were wreaking havoc in Mu Chunxue's meridians. Only then did Mu Chunxue regain her mobility. "Chen Shui, you're too reckless. Don't act on your own next time," Zhuowen said sternly. When he learned that Mu Chunxue was coming to the Seuss Divine Temple, He knew what Mu Chunxue was planning. She definitely wanted to help him deal with the NTI Shiva. Although Mu Chunxue's awakened phoenix bloodline was very powerful, it was still impossible for her to defeat Sakyamuni. Moreover, Sun Qi had made a move this time. If Zhuowen hadn't arrived in time, Mu Chunxue would have been dead by now. Mu Chunxue shrank her head and responded with a guilty conscience. Sun Qi looked at Zhuowen in confusion and then asked Sakyamuni, "Who is this person?" Sakyamuni's eyes were filled with strong killing intent as he stared at Zhuowen. He said in a deep voice, "He is Zhuowen, the true ruler of the great Brahma domain. He is also someone I must kill." Sun Qi nodded. He didn't know who Zhuowen was, but he knew that he was Mu Chunxue's husband. Moreover, the reason why Mu Chunxue was fighting with Sakyamuni was because of the conflict between Zhuowen and Sakyamuni, so Mu Chunxue stood up for him. His only in the death comprehension realm. "Sakyamuni, I think you can easily deal with this kind of trash, right?" Sun Qi said with a look of disdain after discovering Zhuowen's cultivation aura. Sakyamuni nodded and looked at Zhuowen with ridicule and disdain. He glanced at the sacrificial death sword that floated around Zhuowen, and then he said indifferently, "Zhuowen, you've finally shown yourself, you coward. But do you think you can go against me by relying on a divine Tao affirmation artifact? Aren't you too naive?" Zhuowen put down Mu Chunxue and looked at Sakyamuni coldly. "Contend? I, Zhuowen, am here to kill you. You think too highly of yourself by using the word contend." Chapter 26:26. Zhuowen vs Sakyamuni. Brother Zhuo, Yarou Xiangjuan and the others quietly came to Zhuowen's side. Among them, Yarou Xiangjuan looked at Zhuowen worriedly. She could also see that Zhuowen's current cultivation was only at the death enlightenment state. Although she knew that Zhuowen's combat strength was extraordinary, the gap between the death enlightenment state and the heavenly Tao master was too big. No matter how heaven-defying Zhuowen was, it was impossible for him to cross the entire realm and fight against Sakyamuni, who was at the heavenly Tao master level. Palace Master Jing Yun, Magatama, and Yuezu also looked worried. Their thoughts were similar to Yarou Xiangjuan's. They did not think that Zhuowen, who was only at the death enlightenment state, would be a match for Sakyamuni. However, Sun Qi was watching them closely. It was unrealistic for them to escape. After all, in front of an expert like Sun Qi, they could not escape at all. Sun Qi stared at Zhuowen with great interest. The disdain in his eyes became even more intense. He did not take Zhuowen, who was only at the death enlightenment state, seriously. What he cared about was that this little guy, who was only at the death enlightenment state, dared to be so arrogant in front of Sakyamuni, who was a heavenly Tao master. In Sun Qi's view, Zhuowen's behavior was simply a brainless act of seeking death. "Husband, Sakyamuni has successfully attained the Tao." "You," Mu Chunxue said worriedly. However, before Mu Chunxue could finish her words, she coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful face was as pale as snow. Zhuowen quickly took out a level 9 divine healing pill from his spirit ring and gave it to Mu Chunxue. The latter's complexion became better, but the injuries in her body were too serious. She would need a long time to recuperate. Ever since Zhuowen became a Tier 9 alchemist, concocting Tier 9 divine pills was basically a piece of cake for him. In addition, he had inherited the alchemy Tao of the Emperor Pillfire, so the Tier 9 divine pills he concocted were all of unique quality. They were much stronger than ordinary Tier 9 divine pills. "Chen Shui, today, I'll cut off Sakyamuni's for you," Zhuowen said with a smile. Mu Chunxue when she saw the confident smile on translation. Although she knew that Zhuowen's cultivation death enlightenment state, she was surprisingly confident in Zhuowen. Although she knew that Zhuowen's translation, she was still, she Mu Chunxue. She had never doubted Zhuowen. Along the way, she was very clear about what Zhuowen had gone through. He had suffered much more than her. Zhuowen's words were never empty words. After Zhuowen handed Mu Chunxue over to Yarou Xiangjuan and told her to take good care of Mu Chunxue, he walked towards Sakyamuni step by step. Yarou Xiangjuan's expression was complicated. She wanted to persuade Zhuowen, but thinking about their current situation, she knew that anything she said would be in vain. Because whether Zhuowen fought or not, It was not up to them. Sakyamuni would definitely not let them go, so they had to fight even if they didn't want to. Sakyamuni stared at Zhuowen indifferently as if he was looking at a clown. He said nonchalantly, "Have you finished saying your last words to your little lover? If you're done, come and die." With that, Sakyamuni casually waved his right hand. A golden halo of light appeared on his right hand, and a shining god artifact shot out, directly towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen wielded the Sacrifice of Death sword in his right hand and swung it violently. The Sacrifice of Death sword shot through space, slamming towards the shining god artifact. Rumble. The Sacrificial Death sword was too powerful. The moment the golden divine tool came into contact with the Sacrificial Death sword, it was immediately contaminated by the terrifying death energy of the Sacrificial Death sword. Its surface dimmed, and then it exploded. The Sacrifice of Death sword continued onwards, heading straight for Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni also knew that Zhuowen's divine artifact was not simple. After discovering that the halo of light he had summoned was ineffective against it, he did not dare to be careless. Halos of light immediately appeared behind him. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. All kinds of god artifacts shot out of the halos like rain. The only similarity between them was that they were all shining with golden light, as if they were draped in the afterglow of the sun. Zhuowen held the Thunderfire sword in one hand and the Blood Immortal sword in the other. He kicked off the void with his right foot and shot out like an arrow, following behind the Sacrifice of Death sword. Countless golden lights were densely packed. Space and time had already been annihilated wherever the golden lights shrouded. The starry sky was distorted, turning into a terrifying zone. Sakyamuni crossed his arms and looked at the dazzling starry sky before him with a mocking smile. Zhuowen's possession of a divine artifact was indeed beyond his expectations. However, how much power could a cultivator who had yet to prove his Tao be able to unleash? Zhuowen had merely comprehended the state of death. In Sakyamuni's eyes, he was much less of a threat than Mu Chunxue. Rip. The moment Sakyamuni's lips curled into a smile, a huge crack appeared on the surface of the endless golden light. It was like a piece of cloth that had been cut open. A divine sword filled with a grey death aura shot out. Zhuowen held the sword with both hands and followed closely behind the divine sword like a god or a demon. Interesting. A little guy who has comprehended the state of death can actually remain unscathed under such an attack. In the distance, Sun Qi raised his eyebrows. He was a little surprised that Zhuowen had actually broken through Sakyamuni's attack. Although Sakyamuni had not used his strongest attack, it was already terrifying enough. Even a true heavenly law master would have to take it seriously. How could Sun Qi not be surprised that such an attack could not directly kill this ant who had comprehended the state of death? Sakyamuni's face darkened. He looked at the Sacrificial Death sword in front of Zhuowen and was moved. He had underestimated the divine weapon in Zhuowen's hand. Sakyamuni had never thought that Zhuowen, whose cultivation level was only at the state of death, would have the strength to contend with him. Therefore, he attributed all his guesses to the Sacrificial Death sword in Zhuowen's hand. Sakyamuni formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, countless golden lights gathered in his right hand. He began to use the move that he had used against Mu Chunxue earlier. Countless golden lights gathered in his palm and finally formed a golden sword hilt. Then, blood-red patterns gushed out from the end of the sword hilt. Sakyamuni held the sword hilt and suddenly slashed at Zhuowen. Instantly, countless sword rays shot out like a boundless galaxy and smashed into the Sacrificial Death sword. Bang! The Sacrificial Death sword, which had been unstoppable, suddenly stopped moving forward. Sakyamuni sneered and said, "That's it. You can only rely on this divine weapon to possess this level of strength." As he spoke, Sakyamuni had already shuttled through the golden light. Step by step, he moved so fast that it was as if he had teleported. In an instant, he appeared in front of Zhuowen. Sakyamuni swung the divine sword in his hand and blocked the Sacrificial Death sword. Then, he stabbed directly at Zhuowen's vital points. Oh no! Yarou Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes narrowed when she saw this scene. She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Uezu, Magatama, and Palace Master Jingyun all sighed. They knew that Zhuowen was no match for Sakyamuni. Zhuowen was already at his wits' end. If nothing unexpected happened, Sakyamuni's sword would be enough to severely injure Zhuowen or even kill him on the spot. Mu Chunxue watched all of this silently. Her eyes were fixed on Zhuowen's face. She could feel the confidence and fearlessness in Zhuowen's eyes. Chapter 26-27 Zhuowen's promise slaughtering Dao finger. Zhuowen pointed with his right finger. Instantly, the surrounding heavenly energy gathered at the tip of his finger. Then, Zhuowen pointed with his right finger and a huge invisible finger appeared above his head. The invisible finger exuded a terrifying aura as it blocked in front of Zhuowen. Sakyamuni stood on the invisible finger with his sword. Then, he felt as if there were countless mountains pressing down on his hand. His right hand could not help but tremble. Thump, thump, thump. Sakyamuni groaned and could not help but take dozens of steps back. He looked at the huge finger formed by the invisible heavenly energy in shock. Borrowing the power of the heavenly energy? Isn't this the technique of a Dao affirmation expert? You're just an ant that has comprehended the death state. How can you have such a technique? Sakyamuni's face darkened as he looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. Unfortunately, Zhuowen did not care about Sakyamuni at all. The formed slaughtering Dao finger pierced through the air, wanting to completely crush Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni naturally could not sit still and wait for death. He roared and slashed out with the divine weapon in his hand. Terrifying sword chi filled the air. Every sword chi was terrifying enough to destroy any star system. Sakura blasted out a total of 10 swords, and finally, that terrifying slaying Dao finger was completely annihilated and dispersed. Zhuowen sighed inwardly. The tyrannical slaughtering Dao technique was extremely terrifying. The slaughtering Dao finger was a terrifying secret technique that could even kill a heavenly Dao master. Although Zhuowen had cultivated the slaughtering Dao finger to the extreme, his cultivation was still too low. The slaughtering Dao finger he formed had yet to reach the terrifying power of its peak. If Zhuowen had advanced to the life and death state and used the slaughtering Dao finger again, it would be easy for him to kill Sakyamuni, who had just attained the Dao and had not even consolidated his cultivation. Let's see what other moves you have. I think you can only use such a powerful technique once. After destroying the slaughtering Dao finger, Sakyamuni wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. He did not expect Zhuowen to have such a powerful trump card. If Zhuowen could use the slaughtering Dao finger a few more times, he knew that it would be difficult for him to block it. However, Sakyamuni also knew that such a powerful technique skill art finger translation Zhuowen was only in the death realm. It was already very difficult for him to use this move once, let alone multiple times. Moreover, Sakura even saw that Zhuowen's face was slightly pale. Obviously, this move was indeed a huge burden on him. Translation was. Is translation is translation Translation Dao translation Zhuowen smirked when he saw Sakyamuni charging at him again. He knew that the fish had taken the bait. When Sakyamuni was 100 meters away from Zhuowen, Sakyamuni's eyebrows twitched, and his expression changed drastically. The twitching of his eyebrows meant that something dangerous was about to happen. This was one of Sakyamuni's talents. After all, the vertical bar between his eyebrows was very sensitive to danger. Boom! Boom! Not waiting for Sakura to react, Zhuowen, who was in front of him, had already pointed out his finger once again, and moreover, he had continuously pointed out 4 times in the void. In an instant, 4 slaughtering fingers of Dao swept through the air, splitting into 4 different directions as they headed straight for Sakyamuni. Sakyamuni happened to be in the middle of the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers, so there was basically no way out. He could only face the 4 terrifying slaughtering Dao fingers head-on. Is this guy trying to trick me? Sakyamuni's eyes widened. He could see the mockery in Zhuowen's eyes. He knew that Zhuowen was just putting on an act for him. Bang! 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 The 4 slaughtering Dao fingers were extremely fast. They landed on Sakyamuni's body in an instant. Sakyamuni fought with his life on the line. Golden light burst out from his body, and the golden vertical bar between his eyebrows split open, hoping to block Zhuowen's slaughtering Dao fingers. The power of the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers was extremely terrifying. Amidst the endless golden light, apart from the ear-piercing explosions, there was only Sakyamuni's miserable shrieks. Not good. Sun Qi, who was watching the show calmly from the side, realized that the situation was bad at the instant Zhuowen executed the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers. He took a step forward and flashed explosively towards Sakyamuni. Unfortunately, he was quite a distance away from Sakyamuni, and Sakyamuni was quite a distance away from Zhuowen. When he arrived, the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers had already erupted, and he could clearly hear Sakyamuni's miserable shrill cries. Bastard! Sun Qi's expression was unsightly while hesitation appeared in his eyes. The might emanated by the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers gave him a dangerous feeling. He knew that if he charged in just like that, then he would definitely be injured. However, Sakyamuni was a genius that possessed an earth-rank ancestral Dao root, and he was even willing to join the Baihong Hall. Sun Qi wasn't willing to watch as Sakyamuni perished before him. Little bastard! Just you wait. Sun Qi glanced fiercely at Zhuowen, and then he plunged into the terrifying energy that erupted from the slaughtering Dao fingers. All of you leave this place first. Zhuowen spoke to Yarou Shangjuan and the others with a pale countenance. After executing the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers, Zhuowen's countenance couldn't help but turn pale as well because it consumed quite a bit of his strength. Let's go together. Yarou Shangjuan gazed at Zhuowen as she spoke. Even though Zhuowen's sudden execution of the 4 slaughtering Dao fingers to heavily injure Sakyamuni had exceeded Yarou Shangjuan's expectations, it wasn't just Sakyamuni who was here, and Sun Qi was here as well. Sun Qi wasn't a rookie like Sakyamuni that had just stepped foot into the Heaven Dao Lord realm. Sun Qi had been a Heaven Dao Lord for a few thousand years, and his strength was much more formidable than a rookie like Sakyamuni. Moreover, Sun Qi had come from the Xian Mi heavenly realm, so he definitely possessed extremely powerful mystical powers. Yarou Shangjuan didn't think that Zhuowen had any chance of winning against Sun Qi. However, Zhuowen shook his head, and said, "If I don't cut off Sakyamuni's head today, I don't intend to give up." Yarou Shangjuan's brows furrowed in anger, and she couldn't help but glance at Mu Chunxue. She knew that this was a promise that Zhuowen had made to Mu Chunxue. As long as Mu Chunxue persuaded Zhuowen, the latter would definitely stop. Mu Chunxue smiled faintly, and said, "My husband is an indomitable spirit, and his words carry enormous weight. Since he said that he would be able to cut off Sakyamuni's head, then he definitely can do it. I believe in him." Yarou Shangjuan faltered, and then fell silent, her beautiful eyes filled with complex emotions. This was her first time discovering that the gap between her and Mu Chunxue was very large. She didn't understand Zhuowen at all. When she met a problem, it wasn't that she didn't choose to believe in Zhuowen, but rather she was worried about letting Zhuowen escape with her, but she didn't understand Zhuowen's true intentions and methods. Mu Chunxue was different from her. No matter what decision Zhuowen made, she would wholeheartedly support and trust him. "Big brother Zhuo, be careful. We'll be waiting for your good news. Also, I'll help you look after big sister Chen Shui. You have to fulfill big sister Chen Shui's promise." Chapter 26-28. Sun Qi makes a move. Seeing Yarou Shangjuan, Mu Chunxue, and the others leave, Zhuowen turned around and gloomily stared at the figure leaping out of the energy whirlpool. This figure was Sun Qi. At this moment, Sun Qi looked at the severely injured Sakyamuni beside him with an ugly expression. Even he had suffered some injuries. This kid must have used a divine ability, and an extremely powerful one at that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to borrow the power of the heavenly way. Sun Qi put down Sakyamuni, took out a green pill from his spirit ring, and fed it to Sakyamuni. Seeing Sakyamuni swallow the pill, Sun Qi's eyes showed a trace of pain. This was a divine pill of the heavenly way. Even he only had one on him. If it weren't for Sakyamuni's terrifying talent, he wouldn't have been willing to give such a precious pill to Sakyamuni. After taking the pill, Sakyamuni coughed up a pool of blood. Immediately after, His body shone with a faint green light, and his injuries healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Of course, Sakyamuni's injuries were too severe. He was almost on the verge of death. Although the effects of the pill were obvious, it couldn't completely heal Sakyamuni's injuries. However, Sakyamuni slowly woke up from his coma. As if realizing something, Sakyamuni's face darkened. His eyes were filled with rage. Then he looked at Zhuowen, who was hovering in the air nearby, and the fury in his eyes burned even more. Zhuowen, what else can you do apart from using some dirty tricks? Sakyamuni said coldly. I can still kill you. Zhuowen sneered and took a step forward. Like a streak of light, he streaked across the starry sky toward Sakyamuni. The death sacrifice sword was filled with the aura of death. Sakyamuni's expression changed slightly. His current condition was extremely poor. Facing Zhuowen was simply courting death. Fortunately, Sun Qi was by his side. He knew that he was now a disciple of Baihong Hall, and Sun Qi valued him greatly. Sun Qi wouldn't ignore him. How dare you touch a disciple of my White Rainbow Hall? Sun Qi snorted and threw a punch, smashing it in front of Zhuowen. The moment the punch death sacrifice sword, a terrifying heavenly way power force rippled, and then formed a powerful vortex, it actually squeezed on Zhuowen. The death sacrifice sword was blown away, and Zhuowen had retreated. However, he was still hit by the aftershock of the punch. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and he was slightly injured. A mere ant in the death enlightenment state actually has such powerful combat strength. You must have a big secret. Sun Qi snorted coldly, took a step forward, and rushed straight over, punching towards Zhuowen, every punch erupting with terrifying heavenly Tao energy. Zhuowen could only rely on the death sacrifice sword to barely resist Sun Qi's attack. He was secretly shocked by Sun Qi's strength. Although Sun Qi was only a heavenly way master, he was much stronger than Sakyamuni. In particular, the heavenly way power used in each of his punches was much more terrifying than the NTI shivers. Zhuowen was instantly at a disadvantage. Sun Qi became more and more shocked as the battle went on. If he was facing an ordinary death enlightenment state cultivator, he would have killed him with one punch. However, the white-clothed young man in front of him had actually withstood more than 10 moves from him. Although it was because of the death sacrifice sword, it was already very amazing. An ordinary death enlightenment state cultivator could not do this. Thinking of this, Sun Qi felt that Zhuowen must have a big secret. He must kill him, then take his spirit ring and check it. On the spacetime roulette, Bloodscale sat cross-legged and silently looked at Zhuowen, who was at a disadvantage. He had no intention of making a move. I say, you should be the king of the Devouring Clan, right? I smell the aura of the Devouring Clan on you. The green-haired mummy looked bored as he watched the battle between Zhuowen and Sun Qi and casually asked Bloodscale. Bloodscale's pupils shrank. He looked at the green-haired mummy with vigilance and said coldly, "Who are you? How can you sense the aura on my body?" Bloodscale was shocked. He had completely restrained the aura on his body. Even a second-step Dao confirming realm cultivator could not see his true identity. However, the green-haired mummy in front of him could see his true identity at a glance. It meant that this mummy was not simple. You are not qualified to know who I am. Even the ancestor of your devouring clan is like a fart in front of me. Only the 12 ancestors of sorcery can enter my eyes. I have seen the birth of the 12 ancestors of sorcery and then fall. The green-haired mummy snorted coldly. Bloodscale was a little disdainful, but he did not refute. He thought that the green-haired mummy was bragging. The 12 ancestors of sorcery were experts respected by all races in the ancient desolate heaven realm. They were the real kings of all races. Moreover, the 12 ancestors of sorcery had fallen for countless years and had become an ancient legend. This green-haired mummy really knew how to brag. He had seen the birth of the 12 ancestors of sorcery and then fall. Didn't that mean that this mummy was even older than the 12 ancestors of sorcery? Bloodscale naturally did not believe it. Although he could not see through the mummy's aura, it was not enough to give him a strong sense of crisis. Obviously, the mummy's strength was not much stronger than his. The mummy's strength was not even comparable to a finger of the 12 ancestors of sorcery. How could it be compared with the 12 ancestors of sorcery? Are you saying that you are stronger than the 12 ancestors of sorcery? Bloodscale said disdainfully. Of course. If I hadn't been trapped, I would have gone out and defeated the 12 ancestral sorcerers at that time. Unfortunately, I could only witness the rise of the 12 ancestral sorcerers. But I'm sure that the 12 ancestral sorcerers would be courting death if they competed with me in terms of physical strength, said the green-haired mummy. Bloodscale shrugged and said no more. The mummy knew that Bloodscale did not believe him, but he did not care. Yawning, he looked at Zhuowen, who was suppressed by Sun Qi, and said, "You are that boy's servant, aren't you? Your master has been beaten so badly. Why don't you go and help him?" Bloodscale shook his head and said, "Zhuowen's strength is not limited to this. He has been fighting with the original body of the human clan, and his strongest is the clone of the Devourer King." Chapter 26-29. Heavenly Tao level formation. Sun Qi loudly shouted and abruptly turned around. Immediately, he discovered that a black-clothed young man had unknowingly appeared in front of him, and fiercely threw a punch towards his chest. Boom! Sun Qi was too close to the black-clothed young man. When the young man's fist hit his chest, he reacted. Unfortunately, it was too late. Sun Qi arched his waist, and the shadow of a fist appeared on his back. Then, an invisible, ring-shaped airwave swept out like a storm. Sun Qi spat out a mouthful of blood and was suddenly sent flying backwards like a helpless withered leaf. What happened? In the distance, Sakyamuni, who had been watching, was bewildered by the sudden change. Then, he saw the black-clothed young man's face, and his eyes were filled with fear. The black-clothed young man who had ambushed Sun Qi looked exactly the same as Zhuowen. It's Devour's clone. Damn it! How did that kid cultivate his clone to this level? Sakyamuni remembered Devour. That year, he and Taiching had paid attention to the heavenly armor star mainly because of Devour. At that time, he and Taiching hadn't gotten Devour, so Zhuowen had taken advantage of him. However, at that time, Taiching had protected Zhuowen, so Sakyamuni couldn't attack Zhuowen. It had only been several hundred years, but Zhuowen's human body had cultivated at a terrifying speed. His cultivation base had reached the death comprehension realm. Devour's clone was even stronger, and he could even hurt an expert like Sun Qi. What kind of power did he need to do that? No, this is a dangerous place. I can't stay here for long. Sakura realized the seriousness of the situation and retreated in his heart. Soon after, he took advantage of the time when Zhuowen's attention was all on Sun Qi to quietly retreat. Unfortunately, Sakyamuni did not retreat very far. 4 purple swords tore through the air and pierced Sakyamuni's limbs, pinning him firmly in space. He could not move at all. These 4 violet swords were naturally formed from Zhuowen's level 9 Dao intent. Originally, the energy of a level 9 Dao insight didn't pose much of a threat to Sakyamuni. But unfortunately, Sakyamuni was heavily injured now, and he didn't even have 10% of his strength left. Now, he was actually unable to do anything to the violet-colored sword formed from level 9 Dao insight. Zhuowen, you bastard! Sakyamuni was furious. He had never been treated like this before. Zhuowen didn't pay attention to the furious Sakyamuni at all. Instead, he joined forces with his clone to attack Sun Qi. Sun Qi's strength was greatly reduced after he was unexpectedly injured by Zhuowen's clone. Moreover, Zhuowen's clone could cultivate the Pangu sacred body. Although it was just a beginner, its strength was not weaker than an ordinary heavenly Dao master. Coupled with the cooperation of his original body, he naturally had an overwhelming advantage against the heavily injured Sun Qi. Sun Qi was forced to retreat again and again, and the injuries in his body were getting more and more serious. I can't continue to be entangled with this person. I have to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, I may really be left here by this guy. Sun Qi knew that things were not going well. He regretted underestimating Zhuowen. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been forced into such a state by Zhuowen. Thinking of this, Sun Qi took out a disc array. He immediately bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of essence blood on the disc array. Suddenly, complex patterns appeared on the surface of the disc array. Then, A blazing blue light burst out from the disk array. Then, dense blue chains emerged from the blue light. Every single blue chain was over 3 meters thick, and the surface of the chain was engraved with dense inscriptions that he could not understand. These inscriptions radiated with mysterious energy. The blue chains swept out at an extremely fast speed. In an instant, Zhuowen's sky, ground, front, back, left, and right were all sealed. Moreover, these blue chains didn't seem to be inanimate objects. Every time Zhuowen tried to escape through a gap between the chains, a thicker chain would suddenly emerge from the gap and attack Zhuowen through the gap. Moreover, these blue chains were extremely sturdy. Zhuowen could only see some marks on the surface of the chains when he used the death sacrifice sword. As for his clone, it was even more helpless when it encountered these chains. After all, when the clone's physical body, which he was most proud of, hit the chains, these chains completely neutralized the clone's strength in a soft way. It didn't make much progress at all. It's useless. This is a heavenly Dao formation, heavenly lock. Even if a heavenly Dao expert is trapped in this heavenly lock, they won't be able to break free for a while, let alone you. Sun Qi stood outside the heavenly lock. His face was already pale and bloodless. He looked at Zhuowen with great fear and said coldly. Sun Qi had expended a great deal of energy. First, Zhuowen's sneak attack had injured his foundation. Then, Zhuowen's main body and doppelganger had joined forces to pin him down, causing his injuries to worsen. Right now, Sun Qi was probably only able to display a third of his combat strength. I've underestimated you this time. You can actually injure me so badly. Your clone clearly doesn't have any Daoist Rhyme aura. How can it have such powerful strength? Sun Qi looked at Zhuowen inside the heavenly lock. He was extremely curious about the clone beside Zhuowen. When this clone was fighting, it didn't reveal any Daoist Rhyme aura from beginning to end, but its strength was surprisingly terrifying. Zhuowen frowned slightly and looked at the blue chains around him. These blue chains were too sturdy. Zhuowen couldn't break free at all. Not only did you make me waste a heavenly Dao divine pill, but you also forced me to take out a heavenly Dao formation. You deserve to die today. Sun Qi was flustered and exasperated. Whether it was the divine pill that he fed Sakyamuni or the formation that he took out now, they were the only precious things he had on him. Now, in order to deal with a death enlightenment state cultivator, he had used them all. This was definitely a great loss for Sun Qi. If the other disciples of Baihong Hall knew about this, Sun Qi would definitely be ridiculed. Thinking of this, Sun Qi's killing intent towards Zhuowen became even more intense. Explode. Sun Qi's hands formed a seal. His eyes were ferocious. Immediately, the blue chains in the heavenly lock began to expand. A vast and powerful aura was constantly emerging from the blue chains. Boom. When the blue chains expanded to the extreme, they burst out with a dazzling brilliance. The terrifying energy swept through everything as if it was going to destroy the world. Zhuowen's figure was completely engulfed by the terrifying explosive energy. His figure could no longer be seen. Chapter 2630. Universal Teleportation Talisman. Senior Brother Sun, help me catch up to Mu Chunxue and the others. I want them all dead. Only then can I vent the hatred in my heart, Sakyamuni said coldly. Sun Qi frowned slightly and nodded. He did not particularly care about Yarou Shangjuan and the others, but he was a little concerned about Mu Chunxue. He knew that someone in the human race who could awaken the Phoenix bloodline must have something to do with the four Shengzon. If necessary, Sun Qi did indeed plan to capture Mu Chunxue alive and bring her back to the Xian Mi sky region. Whoosh! The moment Sun Qi helped Sakyamuni up, a sound pierced through the air. Before Sun Qi could react, the sound pierced through his chest. The powerful force directly sent Sun Qi flying, and blood spurted out like a fountain. Sakyamuni, who had been helped up, was also sent flying in a sorry state. At this moment, Sakura didn't even understand what was going on. He just realized that in the direction of the heavenly lock, where the explosion had occurred, a figure suddenly rushed out. He would never forget this figure. It was Zhuowen. This guy. Why isn't he dead? Sakyamuni only had time to think this. He saw Zhuowen clench his fist, and a purple sword appeared in his hand. In an instant, he brushed past Sakyamuni. Then, Sakyamuni's head flew into the air, and Zhuowen caught it in his hand. At the same time, Zhuowen's momentum did not decrease. He rushed toward Sun Qi, who was flying backward. He planned to kill Sun Qi as well. Sun Qi's pupils shrank as he felt a great sense of danger. He immediately flicked his finger and took out a talisman from his spirit ring. This talisman was his most precious treasure. It was called the Universal Teleportation Talisman. Within 10 breaths of time after crushing this talisman, his speed could surpass the speed of light. Sun Qi's eyes showed a hint of pain. Then, he suddenly crushed the Universal Teleportation Talisman. His body was then wrapped in a gentle light, and he disappeared. Before Zhuowen could react, Sun Qi had already appeared beside the headless Sakyamuni. Then, with a flash of light, Sun Qi disappeared. Even if Zhuowen used his divine sense to lock onto Sun Qi, he found that he had completely lost track of Sun Qi after 2 breaths. Now, Zhuowen's divine sense was definitely more powerful than that of the heavenly Tao Master. Under the effect of the Pangu banner, his divine soul was constantly strengthening and expanding. Just now, the distance that Zhuowen could radiate was enough to cross an entire heaven domain. However, Sun Qi had escaped from Zhuowen's divine sense in 2 breaths of time. This meant that Sun Qi had crossed an entire heaven domain in 2 breaths of time. What a terrifying speed! Sun Qi is indeed an expert from the Xian Mi heaven domain. Although he is only the heavenly Tao Master, he has so many trump cards. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. He was secretly glad that Sun Qi had detonated the heavenly lock. If he hadn't detonated the heavenly lock, Zhuowen would have had to go through a lot of trouble to escape. However, when the heavenly lock was detonated, Zhuowen immediately merged with his clone. His strength had increased by another level. Coupled with his clone's abnormal physical body, the energy from the heavenly lock's detonation didn't cause too much damage to Zhuowen. Even if he had suffered some injuries, with the Devourer King's terrifying recovery ability, he would have recovered very quickly. It wouldn't affect his strength much. Although it was a pity that Zhuowen couldn't get rid of Sun Qi, being able to kill Sakyamuni was already considered a success. The moment he chopped off Sakyamuni's divine soul, he had destroyed Sakyamuni's divine soul. After successfully confirming one's Tao, a cultivator no longer had an illusory heavenly bridge in his body. The corresponding illusory heavenly bridge would give birth to a Tao root. The Tao root would allow the cultivator's meridians to completely transform into Tao meridians, allowing the cultivator to continuously comprehend the heavenly Tao and continue to cultivate. Therefore, the fatal weakness of a cultivator after confirming one's Tao was the divine soul. Once the divine soul was destroyed, the cultivator was basically finished. Of course, the divine soul of a cultivator after confirming one's Tao was much stronger and sturdier than before. It was basically very difficult to destroy it. Sakyamuni had coincidentally encountered Zhuowen. Zhuowen's divine soul was stronger than Sakyamuni's. In addition, the moment he chopped off Sakyamuni's head, Zhuowen had used the soul kill technique. Therefore, Sakyamuni had died instantly. Zhuowen landed on the spacetime roulette and glanced at Bloodscale indifferently. Bloodscale's heart skipped a beat. He spread his hands and explained that human speed was too fast. Although I wanted to stop him, I couldn't do anything at all. Zhuowen didn't say anything. Bloodscale was right. After using that talisman, Sun Qi's speed had exceeded the speed of light. Even if Bloodscale was at his peak, it might have been possible. However, now, it was impossible. Bloodscale, this is the phagocytosis. Take it back. Zhuowen took out a pile of fragments from his spirit ring and threw them to Bloodscale. Bloodscale looked at the fragments on the ground. His eyelids twitched uncontrollably. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said, "Who destroyed the phagocytosis?" "No, the phagocytosis is the inheritance of my devouring clan's ancestor. It's incomparably sturdy. Who can destroy it?" Zhuowen pointed at the green-haired mummy behind Bloodscale and said, "If you're not convinced, look for the one behind you." Bloodscale was startled. He immediately turned his head and looked at the mummy with extreme hostility. At the same time, he was somewhat shocked. He knew very well how sturdy the phagocytosis was. Even at his peak, he couldn't destroy the phagocytosis. However, this disgusting mummy had destroyed it. It was clear that this mummy wasn't simple. Little guy, it's just a primordial grade divine tool. Do you have to treat it like a treasure? You should know that I've destroyed a transcending heaven-grade divine tool in the past. Do I have to treat such a trashy divine tool so seriously? The mummy shrugged. I'll fight you to the death. This is the sacred object of my devouring clan. I won't allow you to insult it, Xuelin said as he rushed towards the green-haired mummy. Unfortunately, the green-haired mummy knocked Xuelin to the ground with a single punch. Following that, the green-haired mummy kicked Xuelin around. Zhuoan looked at Bloodscale, who was like a child in front of the mummy. His gaze became more serious. He realized that the mummy's strength was even more terrifying than when it was in the ominous vein. Was it because it had absorbed the ominous aura of the ominous vein? In any case, Bloodscale was at the primordial grade at his peak. Although he was only a half-step heavenly Downlord now, because of the devouring king's bloodline, his strength was comparable to a peak heavenly Downlord. Even so, Bloodscales couldn't even withstand a single attack from the green-haired mummy. If it wasn't for the fact that the mummy didn't have any killing intent, Bloodscale would have been killed long ago. In the end, Bloodscale walked back in disappointment. He looked at the green-haired mummy with resentment and fear in his eyes. Hey, Green Hat, where did you come from? Are you related to Pangu? Zhuoan suddenly asked. Chapter 2631 Tuyi Divine Arozhuan felt a little helpless. This green-haired mummy definitely had an extraordinary origin, and it was suppressed by the Pangu banner. It must have something to do with Pangu, but this mummy just refused to admit it. Zhuoan still did not understand why this green-haired mummy wanted to follow him. With its strength, even in the Xian Mi heavenly domain, it was probably a top expert. It was strong enough to stand firm in the Xian Mi heavenly domain. Kid, your bloodstained horn is not simple. I will teach you a chant. You can use this chant to control the bloodstained horn, the green-haired mummy suddenly said. Zhuoan was stunned and took out the bloodstained horn. Speaking of which, he had obtained the cultivation method of the Pangu sacred body from this bloodstained horn. He had only used it as a jade slip to record information. He had never thought that it could be a weapon. Seeing Zhuoan's hesitation, the green-haired mummy said lightly, "If you don't trust me, you don't have to learn it." "I will learn it," Zhuoan said lightly. Zhuoan felt that ever since the green-haired mummy knew that the Pangu banner had chosen him, it no longer had any hostility towards him. In fact, it even had a sense of closeness. However, Zhuoan wasn't sure why. The green-haired mummy nodded and passed the chant to Zhuoan through his divine will. There were not many words in this chant, but Zhuoan could not understand any of them. He looked at these densely packed words as if he was looking at an astronomical number. However, the green-haired mummy's divine will read all these complicated words to Zhuoan, and it repeated them several times. Although Zhuoan did not know the meaning of these chants, he remembered the pronunciation of the chant and unconsciously recited it. Suddenly, a terrifying murderous intent gushed out from the bloodstained horn. Zhuoan bore the brunt of this murderous intent. When he came in contact with this murderous intent, he groaned and kept retreating. Bloodscale was even worse off. The killing intent sent him flying out of the spacetime roulette. He stared at the bloodstained horn in shock. He had never felt such a terrifying killing intent before. It simply made his scalp go numb. Just how many living beings had to be slaughtered to produce such a terrifying killing intent? Zhuoan opened his eyes and looked at the blood-stained horn in front of him. He saw that the blood-stained horn was releasing more and more killing intent, and it was becoming more and more terrifying. Moreover, Zhuoan had an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was as if the killing intent released by the blood-stained horn could be gathered at a certain place according to his will. Thinking of this, Zhuoan directed his killing intent at Bloodscale. Bloodscale felt his scalp go numb as he stared at the blood-stained horn. He could feel the threat of death looming over him. It was as if the blood-stained horn was released, he would die without a doubt. Plop. Master, please spare me. Bloodscale no longer had the courage to face the blood-stained horn. He actually knelt on the ground and trembled all over. Quickly put it away. The green-haired mummy snorted coldly and immediately grabbed the blood-stained horn and took it off. Suddenly, the terrifying killing intent disappeared. Bloodscale collapsed on the ground and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Zhuowen also collapsed on the ground. He was shocked to find that most of the divine power in his body had been sucked out. His body was full of fatigue. It seems that it's too early for you to use this thing. If you had continued just now, your divine power would have been completely absorbed by it, and your life would have been in danger. The green-haired mummy muttered. Zhuowen swallowed a few elixirs and slightly recovered his spirit. Only then did he look at the blood-stained horn in the mummy's hand with lingering fear. Zhuowen had never thought that this ordinary blood-stained horn would be so terrifying. That killing intent was definitely the most terrifying killing intent Zhuowen had ever seen. It was actually able to suppress bloodscale to the point of kneeling and begging for mercy. It could be seen just how terrifying this killing intent was. What the hell is this? Just the killing intent is so terrifying. If it was really used, wouldn't it be even more terrifying? Zhuowen said with lingering fear. This is an arrow. It was used by Hu Yi, a powerful figure in the Wizard Age, to kill the three-legged crow. It is called the number 1 arrow in the Untainted Land. It is extremely terrifying. The green-haired mummy said indifferently. It's an arrow? Zhuowen looked at the blood-stained horn. He really could not tell that it was an arrow. However, the horn was indeed about the length of an ordinary arrow. Moreover, the tip of the horn was dripping with blood. He was afraid that Hu Yi might have used it to kill the three-legged crow. This arrow is enough to kill many powerful figures. It's a pity that there is only an arrow and no bow. It can't display the grand scene of Hu Yi killing the three-legged crow. The green-haired mummy said with some regret. Zhuowen rolled his eyes. He could not control the arrow, let alone Hu Yi's bow. Needless to say, he definitely could not pull it. Even if he found it, it would not be of much use to him now. Let's go. Zhuowen calmed down and planned to leave. He was still a little worried about Mu Chunxue and the others. After all, he did not completely kill Sun Qi. What if Mu Chunxue and the others came looking for Sun Qi? You're afraid that Sun Qi will find trouble with your friends, aren't you? You're worrying too much. That guy's injuries are very serious, and your wife has the Phoenix bloodline. She's not a simple person. She can't take them down. Now, go take a look at the Seuss temple. I think it might be related to the mythological era. The green-haired mummy said. The mythological era? You know about the mythological era? Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy in surprise. The green-haired mummy sneered. After Pangu split the chaos and formed this starry sky, we officially entered the mythological era. That was a brilliant era. How could I not know about it? Didn't I tell you that I watched the birth of this starry sky? I saw the constant changes in this starry sky and the rise and fall of countless powerful figures. I once heard others say that the mythological era originated from Earth. Is that true? Zhuowen said with some excitement. I don't know what Earth is, but the mythological era did originate from a planet. And that planet is in China, the green-haired mummy said coldly. Zhuowen nodded. The green-haired mummy must have known about Earth, but he didn't know that the planet he knew was called Earth. At that moment, the Hu Temple had been reduced to ruins. Zhuowen and the others landed in the ruins and began to search aimlessly. While Zhuowen and the others were looking through the Seuss Temple for information related to the mythological era, Sun Qi's tired eyes landed on a deserted planet far away in space. Sun Qi looked at Sakyamuni, who had lost his head. He frowned. Although he could feel that Sakyamuni was still alive, he was too weak. He knew that Sakyamuni wouldn't last much longer. It wasn't easy to recruit such a talented genius, and now he's dead. I can't accept this, Sun Qi muttered to himself angrily. Chapter 2632. Sakyamuni's doubts. A trace of doubt appeared in Sakyamuni's eyes. He immediately looked around and frowned slightly. Then, he saw Sun Chi's incredulous expression. Senior Martial Brother Sun, what's wrong with me? And where is this place? Sakyamuni looked at Su Chi in confusion. Sun Chi was already stunned and speechless. He was sure that Sakyamuni's soul had been destroyed and his vitality had been cut off. There should be no hope for him. However, Sakyamuni had come back to life, and the head that Zhuoan had cut off had actually grown back on its own. This was really beyond Sun Chi's understanding. Junior Martial Brother Shitian, don't you remember anything at all? Sun Chi asked tentatively. Sakyamuni recalled carefully and muttered to himself in a low voice, I remember that I was injured by that bastard Zhuoan, and Senior Martial Brother Sun, you helped me, and then, I think I was beheaded by that bastard. At this point, Sakyamuni hurriedly touched his head and found that his head was intact. A strange look appeared in his eyes. You've guessed correctly. Your head was indeed chopped off by Zhuoan. However, you've grown a new head. It's as if you've been reborn. Even the life force in your body has been reborn, Sun Chi said solemnly. He guessed that Sakyamuni probably had a strange ability to regenerate his head even when his soul had been destroyed and annihilated. Under normal circumstances, regenerating a severed head was not a strange thing. Virtual sky world cultivators could also do it. What Sun Chi found strange was that Sakyamuni was clearly hopeless and couldn't be saved, but he suddenly came back to life. This was really strange. Moreover, Sun Chi carefully observed Sakyamuni and found that the latter didn't seem to be experiencing terminal lucidity before death. Instead, he seemed to have really come back to life. After Sakura came back to his senses, he revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He didn't expect that he actually had such a powerful ability. Although he couldn't make sense of this so-called ability, since he could regenerate his severed head, and because of that, he knew that there must be a power in his body that he didn't know about. Although he was very interested in the phenomenon of resurrection, he also knew that with his current cultivation, he was afraid that he would not be able to figure it out. He could only wait until he became stronger in the future. Perhaps this hidden ability in his body would slowly surface to the surface. Junior Brother Shitian, what is the background of that Zhuoan? How can he be so powerful? Qi. Thinking of Zhuoan's abnormal strength, Sun Chi still had some lingering fear. Although he wasn't invincible among the masters of the heavenly law, he was at least far stronger than ordinary masters of the heavenly law. Unexpectedly, he was still defeated by Zhuoan. What was even more terrifying was that Zhuoan had just comprehended the death realm. If this abnormal guy was allowed to continue to grow, he would probably be very powerful. Sakyamuni's heart was gloomy. He was also extremely afraid of Zhuoan. He didn't expect that Zhuoan would progress so quickly. He had already become so powerful that he and Sun Chi couldn't do anything to him. There should be a huge secret on this brat's body. Senior Brother Sun, can you inform the White Rainbow Hall to send some experts over and completely annihilate this Zhuoan? The secret on this brat's body is definitely not small. It will definitely be of great benefit to your White Rainbow Hall. Sakura said. Sun Chi shook his head and said, that's not easy. Xian Mi Heavenly Domain has a limit on the number of people who can enter the 8 heavens. Our Baihong Hall is considered one of the top ordinary forces, so we have a quota to enter the 8 heavens. It's impossible to send other cultivators over. Why is that? Sakyamuni asked curiously. Sun Chi smiled bitterly and said, do you think that the 8 heavens are extremely vast? If you really think so, then you are gravely mistaken. The 8 heavens are simply dwarfed by the Xian Mi Heavenly Domain and the Antediluvian Heavenly Domain. Whether it's the Xian Mi Heavenly Domain or the Antediluvian Heavenly Domain, their territories are much larger than the 8 heavens. The number of cultivators they have is also extremely terrifying. If everyone can enter the 8 heavens, then the 8 heavens will really become crowded and even chaotic. Moreover, the restriction on entering the 8 heavens was issued by the Dao Palace level forces. Even the Dao Palace level forces dare not disobey. Sakyamuni nodded and said, I see. Then it seems that the other forces can only send one person over, right? Sun Chi shook his head and said, the stronger the force, the more quota they have. After all, this is not a charity event. Naturally, the stronger the force, the greater the advantage. Moreover, the number of geniuses they can bring back from the 8 heavens is also limited. Sakyamuni nodded and revealed a thoughtful expression. Sun Chi spoke again, Junior brother Shitian, leave the 8 heavens with me first. I will take you to the Xian Mi heavenly domain. With your talent, you will definitely soar in the White Rainbow Hall and surpass Juoan. Senior brother Sun, don't you plan to go to the Sakyamuni domain and the other heavens to screen for geniuses? Sakyamuni asked curiously. Sun Chi sighed softly and said, I used a powerful escape talisman to escape from Juoan. Moreover, I only have one on me. If Juoan catches up to us, our lives will be in danger. The best choice now is to leave this place as soon as possible. Otherwise, if we encounter Juoan again, I'm afraid we will really be unlucky. Sakyamuni fell silent and clenched his fists. He looked in the direction of the Seuss Divine Temple with a murderous look in his eyes. He'd never imagined that such a day would come where he was forced into such a state by a fellow he'd taken to be an ant in the past. Moreover, he didn't dare provoke Juoan and could only flee with his tail between his legs. This battle was absolutely the greatest stain on Sakyamuni's life, and he would definitely get revenge for it. However, he wouldn't do it now, and he'd do it after his strength improved once more. Sakyamuni was clearly aware that he possessed the Earth-rank ancestral Tao root and special abilities within his body. Once he'd completely taken root in the Xian Mi heavenly domain, then Juoan would probably not be a match for him if he came to the Xian Mi heavenly domain. Moreover, the gap between him and Juoan would grow even wider at that time. Sakyamuni had never been an impulsive person, and it was obvious from this that he'd restrained himself from making a move against Juoan after the bet with the Sky Tao ancestor. Senior brother Sun, let's go. I ought to have many things to learn when I return to the Xian Mi heavenly domain this time, right? Sakyamuni smiled lightly. Sun Chi heaved a sigh of relief. He was most afraid that Sakyamuni would act impulsively and look for Juoan to get even with him right now. If that really happened, then Sun Chi would definitely have to consider if he should forcefully take Sakyamuni away. Fortunately, Sakyamuni was very rational. He knew that the current situation was pressing, and he couldn't act rashly. Juoan descended onto the ruins of the Seuss Divine Temple, yet he didn't release his divine sense. He looked at the green-furred corpse and said, Green Hat, you've always said that you've lived for countless years and even watched the development of this expanse of the starry sky. I presume you're aware of this even without searching, right? Chapter 2633. 3 boxes. Juoan shrugged and said, that's a small matter. Green Hat, tell me in detail what you are looking for in the Hue Temple. The green-haired corpse couldn't be bothered with Juoan, who didn't change his words. Instead, it went to the center of the ruins and reached down with its right hand. With a grab, it pulled out a jade pillar. Since the end of the mythological era, the land of origin has been completely abandoned and hidden. Without this thing, you won't be able to find the land of origin. The green-haired mummy grabbed the jade pillar and said to the empty space below, there are some good things down there. Go and look for them. They might be beneficial to your cultivation. Juoan looked at the jade pillar in the green-haired mummy's hand and felt that it was unusual. The surface of the jade pillar was engraved with dense and strange patterns. With a single glance, one could tell that these runes were extraordinary. Juoan could even sense an ancient and vicissitude aura from these runes. It was as though they came from ancient times, and were extraordinary. However, he was quickly attracted by the empty space below the jade pillar. He sensed an extremely rich starry sky energy in the empty space. He also sensed a strong daoist rhyme in the starry sky energy. Juoan summoned the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword. The 2 divine swords turned into a hurricane and blasted towards the empty space. Suddenly, the small empty space was blasted open. Juoan jumped into the space. After a few minutes, he reached the bottom. The bottom was not as dark as Juoan had imagined. Instead, It emitted a light like starlight. About 10 meters in front of Zhuowen, there was a jade table with 3 boxes on it. After Zhuowen stored all 3 boxes into his spirit ring, he checked the space around him. After confirming that there was nothing else, he left the cave. "What did you find?" Bloodscale asked. "There are 3 boxes, but I haven't checked what's in them yet. Let's get on the spacetime roulette and catch up with my wife first." Zhuowen summoned the spacetime roulette and jumped onto it. The green-haired mummy shrugged and felt that this brat was worrying too much. He was actually so concerned about his wife. Bloodscale naturally had no objections. After handing over the control of the spacetime roulette to Xiao Hei, Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the deck and took out the 3 wooden boxes from his spirit ring. Upon closer inspection, Zhuowen discovered that the surface of the 3 boxes was also engraved with complicated patterns. They had the same ancient aura as the patterns on the surface of the jade pillar. Zhuowen opened the first box, and suddenly, a gust of wind roared out. Zhuowen couldn't help but take a few steps back. He was surprised to find that this gust of wind contained extremely terrifying starry sky energy fluctuations. His gaze fell on the box and found that there were 2 milky white stones inside. Each stone was about the size of a quail egg and looked very inconspicuous. However, because the aura of these stones was too terrifying, the weight of these ordinary stones in Zhuowen's heart suddenly increased. These should be the best quality spirit stones in your 8 heavens. The starry sky energy contained within them far surpasses any spirit stones in your 8 heavens. You only need to absorb half of this spirit stone to reach the grand circle of the comprehending death realm. If you can successfully break through the life and death realm, the remaining half spirit stone can also raise your cultivation to the pinnacle of the life and death realm. The green-haired mummy explained. Zhuowen nodded. This spirit stone was a blessing for cultivators below the Tao confirming realm. Zhuowen's advancement was already much more difficult than ordinary cultivators. He was still a distance away from the comprehending death realm. He knew that if he relied on the starry sky energy of the 8 heavens, he didn't know how long it would take to reach the pinnacle of the comprehending death realm. But now, this spirit stone just solved Zhuowen's urgent need. Moreover, the life and death pill was a tier 9 spirit pill. As a tier 9 alchemist, Zhuowen was not unfamiliar with refining the life and death pill. After returning to the Wen Snow Palace, he planned to collect a large number of materials for the life and death pill and start refining a large number of life and death pills. However, these large number of life and death pills were naturally not for the cultivators of the Wen Snow Palace, but for himself. He knew that he was different from ordinary cultivators. Ordinary cultivators only needed 1 life and death pill to fuse the 2 spirit powers of life and death and smoothly advance to the life and death realm. However, Zhuowen was different. The difficulty of his advancement was too high. 1 life and death pill might not be enough. Therefore, he planned to refine more life and death pills. Even if he couldn't use them all, he could put the excess life and death pills in the Wen Snow Palace as a reward for completing a task. Since the first box contained such an extraordinary spirit stone, Zhuowen started to look forward to the next 2 boxes. Of course, if the remaining 2 boxes also contained this kind of spirit stone, Zhuowen would really be speechless. Spirit stones were very useful for cultivators below the Tao confirming realm. However, once a cultivator reached the Tao confirming realm, what they needed for their cultivation was not spirit stones, but the heavenly Tao origin energy. Of course, the essence of the heavenly domain origin energy of the 8 heavenly domains was the heavenly Tao origin energy. This was also the reason why many previous heavenly domain lords were able to successfully reach the Tao confirming realm and enter the Xian Mi heavenly domain. If they didn't have the heavenly domain origin energy, it would be impossible for them to successfully reach the Tao confirming realm. Of course, once they succeeded in reaching the Tao confirming realm, the heavenly domain origin energy of the 8 heavenly domains would not be enough for them to cultivate. Therefore, they basically chose to leave the 8 heavenly domains and enter the Xian Mi heavenly domain. Opening the second box, Zhuowen let out a sigh of relief. This box did not contain the previous spiritual consciousness, but an irregular crystal filled with Tao charm. This crystal was only the size of a thumb. There were dozens of them in this box, and each of them was filled with a strong Tao charm. These are heavenly Tao origin crystals. Each of them is of high quality. I didn't expect there to be so many of them. Bloodscale suddenly came in front of Zhuowen and stared at the crystal in the box. Zhuowen reacted. This was the first time he had seen this kind of crystal. However, this was not the first time he had heard of heavenly Tao origin crystals. He knew that this was something used for Tao-confirming realm cultivators to cultivate. It had the same effect as spirit stones for void sky cultivators. Tao-confirming realm cultivators could plunder the heavenly Tao origin crystals for the heavenly Tao origin crystals they needed to cultivate. Moreover, from Bloodscale's eyes, Zhuowen could see that the heavenly Tao origin crystals in this box were of extremely high quality. At least, even Bloodscale showed such a surprised expression. Zhuowen put away the box, and Bloodscale stared at Zhuowen's right hand with exaggerated eyes. His eyes were full of reluctance. Chapter 2634. Extravagant. Heavens, it's actually a special grade heavenly law origin crystal. This is a very rare item, and there are actually 40 of them in this box. Bloodscale cried out involuntarily. Is this kind of thing really that rare? Zhuowen really couldn't stand Bloodscale's shouting. Bloodscale's breathing was heavy, and it took him a while to calm down. Of course. Heavenly law origin crystals are precious to begin with, and high-grade and special-grade ones are even rarer. I've cultivated for countless years, but I've never obtained a special-grade heavenly law origin crystal. The best I've obtained is a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal, and I've only obtained one, and it was after countless hardships. Thinking up to here, Bloodscale couldn't help but look at the two boxes in Zhuowen's hands. He felt as if his worldview was about to collapse. Such rare special-grade heavenly law origin crystals had actually been obtained by Zhuowen, and he had obtained 40 of them in one go. Whether it was in the Desolate Heaven domain or the Xianmi Heaven domain, these two boxes were definitely priceless treasures. Zhuowen had no concept of the value of heavenly law origin crystals. On the contrary, he felt that Bloodscale's performance was a little excessive. Shrugging his shoulders, he took out a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal and casually tossed it to Bloodscale. What realm can this heavenly law origin crystal help you recover to? Bloodscale was taken aback, but soon revealed a look of ecstasy. He said, "This high-grade heavenly law origin crystal can help me recover to the heavenly law master realm. If Master can give me a few more high-grade heavenly law origin crystals, I still have hope of recovering to the Dao Yuan master realm. At that time, I will be even more helpful to Master." Speaking up to here, Bloodscale revealed a flattering smile. Zhuowen had never seen this before. After all, Bloodscale was the king of the devouring clan, and he had his own pride and dignity. In the past, this fellow had never spoken a single word to him. Now, he was showing such a flattering smile because of a high-grade heavenly Tao origin crystal. This made Zhuowen realize that the high-grade and special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals in his hands were definitely extraordinary items. They would definitely be very useful after he reached Tao affirmation. Zhuowen sternly refused Bloodscale. Since he knew how precious it was, he naturally couldn't give Bloodscale too much. It would be of great use to him in the future. Bloodscale's face was filled with disappointment. However, obtaining a high-class heavenly Tao origin crystal was already quite good. Next, Zhuowen took out the God Stone from the first box and began to cultivate. He planned to test the effects of the God Stone before he caught up with Mu Chunxue and the others. Crash! When Zhuowen tried to absorb the divine energy from the God Stone, he was surprised to find that the God Stone was surging with a powerful starry sky energy that even he could feel unexpectedly and entered his body. This starry sky energy was definitely of the highest quality he had ever absorbed. It filled his entire body and made him feel warm. In less than 2 hours, nearly half of the energy in the God Stone had been absorbed by Zhuowen. The energy in the God Stone was so pure that Zhuowen didn't even need to refine it. It was all converted into his own divine energy. He had also successfully reached the peak of the death comprehension realm. As long as he could completely merge the profound life divine energy and profound death divine energy, he would become a genuine life and death dual extremities expert. At this moment, the space-time roulette controlled by Xiao He had caught up with Mu Chunxue and the others. Because of Mu Chunxue's senses, they were able to find Mu Chunxue and the others so quickly. Mu Chunxue and the others were hiding in a meteorite belt. The one who came out was Yarou Shangjuan. After discovering that it was Zhuowen, Yarou Shangjuan happily welcomed Zhuowen and the others in. Big brother Zhuo, it's great that you're fine. Where are the Nti Shiva and Sun Qi? After bringing Zhuowen to the cave where Mu Chunxue and the others were hiding, Yarou Shangjuan couldn't wait to ask Zhuowen. Magatama, Yuezu, and Palace Master Jingyun also looked at Zhuowen. In their opinion, Zhuowen didn't have the strength to fight against Sakyamuni and Sun Qi at the same time. For him to be able to catch up to them so quickly, it should be because he had escaped from Sakyamuni and Sun Qi's pursuit. Only Mu Chunxue silently looked at Zhuowen. She wholeheartedly trusted Zhuowen, believing that Zhuowen's strength wouldn't be worse than Sun Qi's. I've already cut off Sakyamuni's head and Sun Qi has already fled. After saying this, Zhuowen threw out Sakyamuni's head. He looked at Mu Chunxue and said, Chen Shui, I've already eliminated Sakyamuni for you. Mu Chunxue gave a slight nod as her heart was filled with sweetness. To have a husband who wholeheartedly cared for her, Mu Chunxue felt very happy. What? He actually killed Sakyamuni? So strong. Palace Master Jingyun, Magatama, and Yuezu were all shocked. Soon after, they looked at Zhuowen with eyes filled with awe. As for Yarou Shangjuan, her face was filled with bitterness. She knew that she didn't understand Zhuowen at all. Zhuowen's strength had already reached this level. After Zhuowen informed everyone that there was no longer any danger, he brought everyone back to the Wen Shui Palace. Zhuo Wen's return naturally caused quite a commotion in the surroundings of the Wen Snow Palace. Many cultivators clamored as they were filled with reverence, wanting to see Zhuo Wen's true appearance. It was a pity that Zhuowen went into seclusion as soon as he came back. He ordered Magatama and Yuezu to collect the materials for the life or death pill. After knowing that Zhuo Wen was going to concoct the life and death elixir, the Moon Ancestor and Mo Tian were even more shocked. The life and death elixir was a grade 9 divine elixir, and it required a grade 9 alchemist to concoct it. Zhuowen said that he wanted to refine the life or death pill. Could it be that Zhuowen was also a level 9 alchemist? Thinking of this, Yuezu and Magatama felt even more reverence for Zhuowen. They knew that their lord of the heavenly domain was much more powerful and terrifying than they had imagined. Naturally, they paid more attention to Zhuowen's orders. They didn't dare to neglect them in the slightest. During the time that Zhuowen was in seclusion, Mu Chunxue took care of many trivial matters in the Wen Shui Palace for Zhuowen. For this, Zhuowen was extremely touched. He gave half of the heavenly law origin crystal he had just obtained to Mu Chunxue. Zhuowen knew that Mu Chunxue was already a half-step heavenly law lord. If she cultivated step by step, her chances of reaching the Tao affirmation realm would be very slim. However, with the heavenly law origin crystal, it would be much simpler. It should be known that a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal contained much more heavenly law origin crystals than the heavenly domain origin crystals of the 8 heavenly domains. If a half-step heavenly law lord used a high-grade or special-grade heavenly law origin crystal to cultivate, they would be able to break through. Of course, if Zhuowen's method was seen by the cultivators of the Xian Mi heavenly domain, he would definitely be regarded as a wastrel. Generally speaking, first-step Tao affirmation cultivators basically used low-grade heavenly law origin crystals to cultivate. Only some wealthy cultivators could afford to use mid-grade heavenly law origin crystals. Using high-grade heavenly law origin crystals to cultivate was already an extremely extravagant thing. This was because most of these crystals were used by second-step Tao affirmation cultivators. Chapter 2635. Pangu Sacred Body. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. During these 3 months, Zhuowen had been in a state of seclusion. In the gloomy room, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. The terrifying flames that covered his body were slowly extinguished. In front of him was a huge alchemy furnace. At this moment, The flames at the bottom of the furnace had also extinguished. From the top of the furnace, a refreshing medicinal fragrance wafted out. Zhuowen's eyes suddenly sharpened. Then, he slapped the alchemy furnace with his right hand. A crisp sound came from the alchemy furnace. The lid of the alchemy furnace opened, and dozens of elixirs flew out. These elixirs were black and white, and they were filled with the strange aura of life and death. They were the level 9 life and death elixirs. Zhuowen took out a jade bottle and placed all the life and death elixirs that had just come out of the furnace into it. His face revealed a satisfied expression. During these 3 months, Magatama and Uezu had been searching for the ingredients for the life and death elixir. When all the ingredients were gathered, Zhuowen began to refine the life and death elixir. Until now, Zhuowen had refined more than 300 life and death elixirs. This was a terrifying number. It should be known that in the 8 great heavenly domains, a life and death elixir was priceless. Many cultivators would fight over it. However, Zhuowen alone had refined more than 300 life and death elixirs. This meant that these 300 life and death elixirs could create more than 300 super experts at the life and death realm. Of course, Zhuowen was still a little dissatisfied. In fact, he could refine more life and death elixirs, but the ingredients for the life and death elixirs were limited. After all, the divine herbs that could refine level 9 life and death elixirs were extremely precious and rare. If it weren't for Zhuowen being the ruler of the Great Brahma domain and having an extremely strong appeal, he wouldn't have been able to gather all the herbs needed to refine more than 300 life or death pills in just 3 months. Zhuowen was a little hesitant. He didn't know if these 300 life and death pellets could help him smoothly break through the life and death realm. Suddenly, a terrifying aura rushed over from the corner of the room. Immediately, a figure slowly stood up from that corner. This figure was none other than Zhuowen's clone. At this moment, the star of fire between the black-clothed Zhuowen's eyebrows was extremely blazing. It flickered with a dazzling red light, as if there was a scorching flame burning and churning in the depths of the star of fire. Originally, the flame star on Zhuowen's forehead was extremely dim. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see the mark of the flame star. But now, the star of fire between the black-clothed Zhuowen's eyebrows was burning fiercely, as if there was a ball of fire burning in the depths of the star. The fiery star was the symbol formed after Zhuowen's doppelganger merged with the Zhurong worm. It also meant that he was qualified to cultivate the Pangu sacred body. Now, the fiery star seemed to be real and was burning fiercely. Obviously, Zhuowen had officially started cultivating the Pangu sacred body. At the same time, the moment he officially started cultivating the Pangu sacred body, an ancient and vicissitude divine thought was transmitted to his divine soul. This divine thought was cold and ruthless. It sounded like the sound of metal being knocked on. It was emotionless. From this divine thought, Zhuowen knew the true cultivation level of the Pangu sacred body. Of course, Zhuowen's Pangu sacred body was still incomplete. This was because the true Pangu sacred body required the collection of the 12 ancestor sorcerers' venomous insects and merging them into one's body to achieve the Pangu sacred body. Zhuowen had only merged with the Zhurong worm. It was a bit difficult to say that he had the Pangu sacred body. However, the code he cultivated was indeed inherited from the Pangu sacred body. In the future, it was only a matter of time before he collected the other ancestor sorcerers' venomous insects. After all, he had the Pangu banner and the Pangu sacred body. Other people might be able to get the ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects to cultivate the ancestor sorcerer's body, but they could never merge with other ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects. Otherwise, they would definitely explode and die. However, Zhuowen was qualified to merge with many ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects. This was Zhuowen's advantage. In the divine thought, the Pangu sacred body was the same level as the sorcerer tribe. The sorcerer tribe was divided into 9 stars. They were 1-star heaven wizard to 9-star heaven wizard. Above heaven wizard was the ancestor sorcerer's body, which was 1-star heaven wizard to 9-star heaven wizard. Naturally, there were only 12 spots for ancestor sorcerer. Only those who were lucky enough to get the ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects could cultivate to become ancestor sorcerer. Ancestor sorcerer's strength was far beyond that of heaven wizard and human tribe cultivators of the same level. Zhuowen cultivated the Pangu sacred body. Although he only had the ancestor sorcerer's body now, his strength was stronger than the ancestor sorcerers of the same level. After all, the Pangu sacred body was far more powerful than any code of the sorcerer tribe. It deserved to be called the strongest code. During these 3 months, Zhuowen tried to let the black-clothed Zhuowen absorb the high-class heavenly law origin crystal. Zhuowen was pleasantly surprised that the black-clothed Zhuowen's strength was increasing when he absorbed the high-class heavenly law origin crystal. It seemed that the sorcerer tribe also used the heavenly law origin crystal for cultivation. After consuming 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals, the black-clothed Zhuowen barely reached the beginner level and reached the 1-star Pangu sacred body. Zhuowen did not have many heavenly law origin crystals with him. Moreover, he had given half of them to Mu Chunxue. He only had 20 high-class and special-class heavenly law origin crystals with him. This time, in order to let the black-clothed Zhuowen reach the beginner level of the Pangu sacred body, he had spent half of the high-class heavenly law origin crystals. Even Zhuowen felt the pain in his heart. Of course, the results were indeed a pleasant surprise for Zhuowen. After attaining the 1-star Pangu sacred body, the black-clothed Zhuowen's strength increased a lot. Zhuowen estimated that if he were to face Sun Qi again, his clone would be able to kill Sun Qi with one punch. It could be said that neither the 1-star heaven sorcerer nor the heavenly law master was a match for Zhuowen. The black-clothed Zhuowen might not necessarily be at a disadvantage when facing an expert at the level of Master Dao Yuan. This was the terror of the Pangu sacred body. If he encountered an expert like Primordial Chaos Master, who was at the 3rd minor realm of the first step of Dao validation, the black-clothed Zhuowen might not be a match for him. However, Zhuowen was confident that he could at least escape from such an expert. Zhuowen looked at the remaining 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals in the box. He knew that even if the black-clothed Zhuowen absorbed all 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals, it would be impossible for him to advance further and reach the 2-star Pangu sacred body. The 1-star Pangu sacred body alone had consumed 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals. The resources required for the 2-star Pangu sacred body were definitely several times or even dozens of times more than the 1-star Pangu sacred body. Perhaps only the special class heavenly law origin crystals can continue to improve the Pangu sacred body. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He only had 20 special class heavenly law origin crystals in total. Moreover, from Bloodscale's attitude, he could see that the special class heavenly law origin crystals were extremely precious. Chapter 2636. Advancing to the extremities of life and death. After careful consideration, Zhuowen decided to use the special grade heavenly law origin crystal to increase the strength of his doppelganger. These were troubled times. Putting aside the fact that the cultivators of the Xian Mi heavenly domain were about to arrive, Zhuowen did not know how long the seal at the gap in the origin heaven domain could last. Whether it was the Xian Mi heavenly domain or the origin heaven domain, Zhuowen maintained an extremely high level of vigilance. In the eyes of these two heavenly domains, the 8 heavens were more like sacrificial lambs for the competition between the 2 heavens. If Zhuowen was not strong enough, it was very likely that he would not be able to protect himself when he encountered unknown dangers in the future. This was not what Zhuowen wanted. The special grade heavenly law origin crystal was indeed precious, but if he did not have enough strength, it would be a waste to leave it lying around. It was better to convert it into his own strength as soon as possible. After thinking this through, Zhuowen no longer hesitated. He took out the box containing the special grade heavenly law origin crystal and handed it to the black-robed Zhuowen. The black-robed Zhuowen took the box and swiftly opened it. He took out a special grade heavenly law origin crystal and began to absorb the energy inside. Instantly, Zhuowen only felt a terrifying energy rush straight into his internal organs. The energy in the special grade heavenly law origin crystal was so rich that it exceeded Zhuowen's imagination. The energy around the black-robed Zhuowen swept out like a storm. Zhuowen's pupils shrank, and he hurriedly set up a concealment array and several defensive arrays around the black-robed Zhuowen, preventing this terrifying energy fluctuation from spreading to the outside world. As expected of a special-grade heavenly law origin crystal. Such rich energy. It's much richer than a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal. Zhuowen's main body stood not far away. He clicked his tongue in wonder as he watched the energy fluctuation around his doppelganger. It's time for me to attack the extremities of life and death. I hope these life and death pills are enough for me. Zhuowen calmed down and took out bottles of life and death pills and placed them around the praying mat. He sat down on the praying mat and opened the first jade bottle. He poured out a life and death pill and swallowed it. At the same time, Zhuowen summoned the illusory heavenly bridge. At this moment, a black lotus and a white lotus were growing on the 9th step of Zhuowen's ethereal bridge. The black lotus was filled with the aura of death while the white lotus was full of vitality. These two lotuses contained the profound life divine energy and the profound death divine energy respectively. What Zhuowen needed to do now was to fuse the two lotuses together and create the life and death divine power. The moment he swallowed the life or death elixir, a concept of the fusion of life and death appeared in Zhuowen's mind. As Zhuowen comprehended this concept, he tried to merge the profound life divine energy and profound death divine energy in his body. Of course, the two divine forces in Zhuowen's body were simply too powerful, much more so than an ordinary cultivator with 9 steps. When Zhuowen tried to merge them for the first time, he immediately failed. Zhuowen was not discouraged. He already knew that the process of advancing to the two extremes of life and death would not be so smooth. Therefore, he was very calm about his first failure. After swallowing the second life or death elixir, Zhuowen continued to try to merge them. A month later, after swallowing more than 200 life or death elixirs, Zhuowen's ethereal bridge finally changed. On the 9th step of the ethereal bridge, the two lotuses, one black and one white, actually merged together and formed a strange giant lotus with alternating black and white colors. This lotus was filled with the aura of the fusion of life and death. Zhuowen took a step forward and stepped onto the 9th step of the ethereal bridge. Immediately after, he sat down on the core lotus seat of the black and white lotus. In an instant, the aura of life and death enveloped Zhuowen's entire body as if it was baptizing Zhuowen's entire body and soul. As he bathed in the aura of life and death, Zhuowen could clearly sense that his entire body was undergoing an inconceivable change. The profound death divine energy and profound life divine energy in his body had completely merged and formed a new divine force. This divine force was naturally the divine energy of life and death. Moreover, this divine energy of life and death was even more powerful and surging than the profound death divine energy and profound life divine energy. It made Zhuowen feel as if his entire body was filled with strength. The ethereal bridge slowly dissipated while Zhuowen landed on the ground. His face was suffused with vigor. After advancing to the two extremes of life and death, he could clearly sense that his strength had undergone a qualitative leap. In the past, when his main body comprehended the state of death and did not rely on his clones, his strength was at most equivalent to the peak of the two extremes of life and death. If he encountered an existence like a half-step heavenly Tao master, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Now that Zhuowen had advanced to the two extremes of life and death, he was invincible in the same realm. He could even kill a half-step heavenly Tao master with a single slap. Of course, if he encountered a real heavenly Tao master, Zhuowen guessed that he might still be slightly inferior. However, Zhuowen knew that he had just advanced to the two extremes of life and death. Once his cultivation reached the peak of the two extremes of life and death, or even the half-step heavenly Tao master, he would not be afraid of ordinary heavenly Tao masters at all. He might even be able to defeat them. After advancing to the two extremes of life and death, Zhuowen was in a good mood. His gaze fell on the black-clothed Zhuowen in the corner. Immediately, he was stunned to discover that the box that originally contained 20 special-class Heavenly Tao origin crystals was now only left with 5. F***CK, my clone used 15 special-class Heavenly Tao origin crystals. This, Zhuowen was shocked and looked at the black-clothed Zhuowen in disbelief. Especially when he discovered that the black-clothed Zhuowen only had a 1-star Pangu sacred body, Zhuowen's heart almost collapsed. That was 15 special class Heavenly Tao origin crystals, yet his clone had not advanced to a 2-star Pangu sacred body. The energy required to advance to a 2-star Pangu sacred body was too terrifying. However, Zhuowen was slightly comforted by the fact that although his clone had not advanced to a 2-star Pangu sacred body, the flaming star between his eyebrows was even more blazing than before. Moreover, the clone's aura was much stronger than before. Obviously, he should have reached the peak of the 1-star Pangu sacred body realm and was not far from the 2-star Pangu sacred body realm. After the special class Heavenly Tao origin crystals in the clone's hand were used up and turned into countless white fragments, he grabbed another special class Heavenly Tao origin crystal under his painful gaze. Looking at the box that only had 4 special class Heavenly Tao origin crystals left, Zhuowen's heart ached even more. After the clone used up the 16th special class Heavenly Tao origin crystal, Zhuowen's sharp eyes noticed that a second flaming star had split out next to the flaming star between the clone's eyebrows. However, this flaming star was extremely dim and there was only half of it. Compared to the first flaming star, it was not only incomplete but also dim. Zhuowen's eyes lit up. He knew very well what this half of a star represented. This meant that the clone was about to step into the 2-star Pangu sacred body realm. Every time the Pangu sacred body advanced to a star, an additional star would appear between the eyebrows, which represented the level of the Pangu sacred body. Chapter 2637. 2-star sacred body. Thinking of this, Zhuowen no longer felt heartache over the consumed special class Heavenly Law origin crystals. Instead, he poured out the remaining 4 special class Heavenly Law origin crystals from the box and threw them to his doppelganger, intending to let his doppelganger absorb the 4 special class Heavenly Law origin crystals in one go. In an instant, the energy fluctuations around his doppelganger became even more terrifying. In addition to the Heavenly Law origin crystals that his doppelganger had brought, there were now 5 special class Heavenly Law origin crystals surrounding his doppelganger. The energy fluctuations they emitted were much more terrifying than before. Even the large array that Zhuowen had set up around him was a little shaky and showed signs of trembling violently, as if it was about to completely collapse. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He immediately took out the beast bone array disc and began to stabilize the large array around him. Finally, he suppressed the terrifying trembling. As he continued to absorb the energy of the 5 Heavenly Law origin crystals, Zhuowen clearly noticed that the second flame star between his doppelganger's eyebrows was beginning to complete. When the 5 special class Heavenly Law origin crystals were completely turned into powder, the surrounding chaos finally stopped. Zhuowen's original body discovered that the half-flame star between his doppelganger's eyebrows had completely recovered. Although the second flame star was still very dim, it was at least much better than the previous half-flame star. At least it looked very complete. His doppelganger suddenly opened his eyes, revealing a look of excitement. He did not expect that he had really advanced to the 2-star realm. Although he had just barely entered the 2-star realm, his strength had undergone earth-shaking changes. With the divine power of the Pangu sacred body, even a primordial Tao cultivator would not be a match for his current doppelganger. Primordial chaos cultivator might not be able to kill his current doppelganger. It could be said that his current doppelganger had the ability to protect himself even in the Shen Mi heavenly domain. Zhuowen planned to let his doppelganger consolidate his realm for a while, so he did not plan to come out of seclusion now. Although his original body had advanced to the 2 extremities of life and death, he still had the supreme-grade divine stone he had obtained. Back in the spacetime roulette, Zhuowen had only absorbed half of the energy from the supreme-grade God Stone to cultivate to the peak of enlightenment death realm. Now, he had 1.5 top-grade Godstones on him. He believed that if he absorbed the energy of 1.5 top-grade Godstones, it would be enough for his original body to cultivate to the peak of the life and death extremes. After all, the quality of this divine stone was much higher than any top-grade divine stone in the 8 heavens. The energy it contained was also not something an ordinary top-grade divine stone could compare to. Zhuowen was very confident in this divine stone. Zhuowen spent half a day absorbing all the divine stones in his hand. His aura instantly soared to the peak of the twin extremes of life and death, and he wasn't far from becoming a half-step heavenly Tao Lord. Looking at the last box in his hand, Zhuowen smiled bitterly. He had obtained 3 boxes, and the divine stones and special-grade heavenly law origin crystals had all been used up. There were only 10 high-grade heavenly law origin crystals left in this box. Zhuowen's original body could rely on these high-grade heavenly law origin crystals to comprehend the heavenly Tao and step into the half-step heavenly Tao Lord. He even had a chance to become a heavenly Tao Lord. However, Zhuowen didn't do that. He knew very well that haste made waste. By using these high-grade heavenly law origin crystals, Zhuowen could indeed become a half-step heavenly Tao Lord in a short period of time. However, the process of Tao affirmation emphasized one's own understanding of the heavenly Tao and not relying on resources. This would inevitably have side effects on one's future cultivation path. Now that Zhuowen's clone had reached the 2-star Pangu sacred body, his strength was already guaranteed. Naturally, he wouldn't choose to cultivate in such a short-sighted way. After all, if one cultivated step by step, their foundation would be more stable, and they would be able to go further in the future. This was like building a house. The deeper and more stable the foundation, the higher the house could be built. If the foundation was not stable, the house could easily collapse even if it was built very high. After putting away his clone, Zhuowen left the place where he was cultivating in seclusion. At the door, he immediately saw Magatama and Yuezu, who were guarding outside. "You guys have been guarding outside all this time?" Zhuowen looked at the 2 of them and asked with a frown. Magatama and Yuezu quickly responded submissively. They felt that Zhuowen's aura seemed to have become stronger. In front of the current Zhuowen, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They knew that Zhuowen's strength must have increased a lot during this seclusion. Thinking of this, their reverence for Zhuowen became even stronger. Zhuowen nodded. He was quite satisfied with Magatama and Yuezu. He also found that their cultivation had reached the life enlightenment realm. They should have advanced when he was not in the Wen Snow Palace. Zhuowen took out 10 jade bottles and handed them to the 2, saying, "Each of these 10 jade bottles contains more than 10 life or death pills. There are more than 100 pills in total. Take them first and store them in the Wen Snow Palace. Use them as rewards in the future. Of course, the 2 of you have the priority to use them. You don't need my permission. You can use them for your cultivation." As soon as these words came out, Magatama and Yuezu trembled and revealed surprised and ecstatic expressions. They were surprised that Zhuowen had refined so many life or death pills and ecstatic that they had the priority to use them. It had to be known that the life or death pill contained the energy of life and death. Whether it was the life enlightenment realm, death enlightenment realm, or life and death realm cultivators, they all had benefits that were hard to hide. It could increase their cultivation speed. For Magatama and Yuezu, having a single life or death pill was already a great favor. But now Zhuowen had given them over 100 life or death pills and had given them priority to use them. How great of a favor was this? "Domain Lord, many thanks for your favor." Magatama and Yuezu knelt on the ground, sincerely bowing to Zhuowen. Zhuowen waved his hand and said, "Where's Chen Shui?" "Young Miss Chen Shui is still in seclusion and hasn't come out yet." Yuezu carefully said, "Domain Lord, do you want me to call young Miss Chen Shui?" "No need. Chen Shui should be at a critical moment in her breakthrough, so there's no need to disturb her." Zhuowen waved his hand. He knew that Mu Chunxue had obtained the heavenly Tao origin crystal, and with her phoenix bloodline, her cultivation speed would definitely be faster than his. Perhaps her cultivation could even reach the Tao origin realm. It was clearly unreasonable to disturb Mu Chunxue at this moment. Yuezu nodded. After hesitating a bit, he said to Zhuowen, "Domain Lord, while you were in seclusion, many unknown cultivators appeared in the Great Brahma domain. Moreover, these cultivators were all very strong, at least in the life and death realm. There were even cultivators suspected to be Tao-confirming realm experts." Chapter 2638. The members of Xian Mi Heavenly Region, are there many of them? Have there been any conflicts? Zhuowen's gaze was gloomy. These cultivators from the powers of Shen-Mi heavenly region were definitely existences at least at the level of Heaven Dao masters. If it wasn't necessary, Zhuowen wasn't willing to enter into conflict with these cultivators. No. Even though these cultivators from Shen-Mi heavenly region seem arrogant, they didn't look for trouble with us. However, during this period of time, these people have occupied the assignment hall and erected a stone stele within the hall. Supposedly, that stone stele tests the so-called ancestral Dao root, and the ancestral Dao root is supposedly related to whether one can attain the Dao in the future. It's the symbol of a cultivator's natural talent. Magatama hurriedly cupped his hands and spoke. Zhuowen frowned slightly. Looks like Sun Qi is right. Most of these cultivators from Shen-Mi heavenly region have come to recruit people, and they don't care about the gap that seals the primitive heavenly region. Actually, Zhuowen didn't know that the cultivation civilization in Shen-Mi heavenly region had already developed to the extreme, and the law of the jungle was displayed vividly there. Formidable powers controlled most of the resources, and it was even to the extent that the geniuses with top natural talent were reserved by those formidable powers in advance. On the other hand, the geniuses with inferior natural talent were selected by those slightly stronger powers, and they were divided up layer by layer. So, there was practically no new blood with good natural talent left behind for those powers at the lowest level. It could be said that most of the cultivators that had come to the Eight Heavens were sent over by the powers at the lowest level of Shen-Mi heavenly region, and their strengths weren't especially strong. However, they were extremely enthusiastic towards the cultivators of the Eight Heavens. After all, the Eight Heavens were like undeveloped lands. Perhaps there weren't any top geniuses with heaven-grade ancestral Dao roots like Shen-Mi heavenly region, but their requirements weren't high. So, if they were able to obtain a profound grade ancestral Dao root, then they would have profited. If they were able to obtain an earth-grade ancestral Dao root, then they would have profited greatly. Of course, they wouldn't let go of even the lowest yellow-grade ancestral Dao root. After all, those that possessed ancestral Dao roots could be considered as geniuses, and all of them had the potential to attain the Dao. However, the higher the grade of the Dao root, the higher the success rate of attaining the Dao. Moreover, after attaining the Dao, one's cultivation speed would be much faster and stronger than other cultivators. The ancestral Dao roots possessed by true almighty figures in the Shen-Mi heavenly region were at least at the earth grade, and there were also extremely terrifying heaven-grade ancestral Dao roots. Generally speaking, as long as a cultivator who possessed a formidable Dao root didn't perish, then without exception, all of them would become formidable almighty figures. They didn't get my permission to erect the stone tablet in the mission hall, did they? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said indifferently. Magatama and Yuezu's hearts skipped a beat as they thought to themselves, these are experts from the Shen-Mi heavenly domain, and they are all heavenly Dao experts. Could it be that Zhuowen is planning to cause trouble for them? They felt disbelief because there were at least a few tens of cultivators from the Shen-Mi heavenly region that had come to the mission hall this time, and all of them possessed extremely vast auras. Could it be that Zhuowen intends to cause trouble for these experts? Even though Zhuowen had killed Sakyamuni and injured Sun Qi from the Shen-Mi heavenly region's Baihong Hall, they still didn't think that Zhuowen was capable of going against a few tens of experts who had attained the Dao by himself. Because this was simply an act of courting death. Region Lord, you intend to? Magatama asked cautiously. They arrogantly erected the stone tablet in the mission hall of the Wen Snow Palace and even publicly tested their ancestral Dao roots to recruit members from our Shen-Mi heavenly region. Don't you think they've gone too far? They don't take our Wen Snow Palace seriously at all. Zhuowen spoke coldly. When Magatama and Yuezu heard this, they had a bad feeling in their hearts. They didn't expect that Zhuowen really intended to seek an explanation from those cultivators from the Shen-Mi heavenly region. Region Lord, there are a few tens of people from the Shen-Mi heavenly region that have come to our Great Brahma heavenly region. Moreover, I'm guessing that all of them are experts who have attained the Dao. Moreover, they haven't done anything out of line. I think we don't need to have a conflict with them, right? Yuezu said cautiously. Zhuowen said indifferently, let's go to the mission hall first. After saying that, Zhuoan took the lead and walked towards the mission hall. Yuezu and Magatama looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. Even though they hadn't been in contact with Zhuoan for a long time, they knew Zhuoan's character. They knew that he was someone who could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. They were really afraid that after Zhuoan entered the mission hall, he would have a conflict with those experts. However, they weren't the region lord. The real region lord was Zhuoan, so they couldn't disobey Zhuoan's orders. At this moment, the huge mission hall was no longer lively and bustling like before. Instead, it seemed extremely cold and cheerless. Interestingly, most of the cultivators were basically standing at the entrance of the mission hall. If one looked carefully, there was an invisible barrier set up at the entrance, preventing the cultivators at the entrance from entering the mission hall. Inside the mission hall, there was a stone tablet that was several feet high. The surface of this stone tablet had a metallic texture, and its surface was covered with complex lines, giving it a mysterious aura. At this moment, dozens of people surrounded the stone tablet. These dozens of people followed two people's lead. These two people were a sturdy middle-aged man wearing a vest that exposed his strong arms, and the other person was an old man wearing a long cloth robe with a goatee. Based on the gazes of the people in the surroundings, it was obvious that these two people were probably the strongest people here. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to reveal expressions of fear and reverence. At a rather corner of the mission hall, a tall woman in a cheongsam had her legs crossed and her arms crossed over her chest. She was an extremely sexy woman, especially her slender legs that were hidden under her dress. The fair skin that was exposed had a moving glow to it, and it caused others to be unable to help but want to pry into the secrets behind it. An enormous iron giant stood by the woman in the cheongsam. The iron giant was 6 feet tall, and the woman in the cheongsam only reached the iron giant's waist. The iron giant's eyes were suffused with a faint red glow, and it didn't say a word. It didn't seem like a human. How ignorant. How could a true genius be born in a barren and backward place like the 8 heavens? You're already lucky to find a cultivator with a yellow rank ancestral Dao root. Our violet red house really disdains to recruit such a disciple with a trash ancestral Dao root. The sexy woman in the cheongsam shook her head lightly as she gazed at the cultivators that entered the mission hall in an orderly manner and took the test on the stone tablet. The test had already been carried out for a few days. Unfortunately, a true genius with an ancestral Dao root hadn't appeared until now. Not even a yellow rank ancestral Dao root had appeared. Chapter 2639. Earth-grade Dao root. The woman in the cheongsam had always been against coming to the 8 heavens to recruit cultivators. Instead, she wanted to follow Master Yuan Hui to the gap in the primitive heavenly domain to help seal it. Unfortunately, Master Yuan Hui was too arrogant. He didn't care about them at all. After entering the 8 heavens, he went to the gap alone and warned them not to follow him. If they followed him, it would be equivalent to offending Master Yuan Hui. Master Yuan Hui was an eternal grade formation Dao God Master. He wasn't from any of the powers behind them. He was the Huangji clan's formation Dao God Master. The Huangji clan was a colossus in the host region. They were a true Dao palace level power. Even the purple red house behind the woman in the cheongsam couldn't compare to them. After all, the purple red house was only a Dao sect level power. Moreover, it was a relatively weak Dao sect level power. In front of a powerful power like the Huangji clan, even 10 purple red houses wouldn't be enough. They didn't dare to disobey Master Yuan Hui's words. Therefore, they could only stay in the Great Brahma domain and wait for news from Master Yuan Hui. The cultivators who came to escort Master Yuan Hui didn't belong to the same power. Each of them was only a representative of a power in the host region. Among this group, the woman in the cheongsam knew that only 2 people came from Dao sect level powers like her. The rest were just ordinary powers. These people came to escort Master Yuan Hui to curry favor with Master Yuan Hui. They hoped to leave a good impression on Master Yuan Hui. After all, if they could build a good relationship with an eternal grade formation Dao God Master like Master Yuan Hui, they would have a smooth journey in the Shen-Mi heavenly domain. They might even be able to ask Master Yuan Hui to refine powerful formations for them. It was because of this that so many cultivators took the initiative to escort Master Yuan Hui. Even though Master Yuan Hui had brought the Huangji clan's bodyguards with him, these people still stuck to Master Yuan Hui like sticky candy. Before arriving at the 8 heavens, Master Yuan Hui didn't say anything. As soon as he arrived, he immediately chased them away. This made the cultivators who were scheming feel disappointed. The cultivators who were left behind started to target the cultivators in the 8 heavens. They hoped to find geniuses with heaven-defying Tao roots in the 8 heavens. Unfortunately, the results of the tests over the past few days had left them extremely disappointed. Yuan Hui, why did my father send me to such a boring place? How boring, the woman in the Cheongsam said in boredom. Young mistress, don't forget the mission. The steel giant standing beside the Cheongsam woman reminded in a low, muffled voice. The Cheongsam woman curled her lips and said, "My father sent you to spy on me, right? You talk about missions every day." I wouldn't dare. The steel's giant lowered his head, but his voice was still emotionless. Forget it, telling you is like playing the lute to a cow. It's boring. Do you really think the 8 heavens are hiding the origin of the starry sky? Besides, we're not the only ones who know about it, right? The other powers must know about it as well. The woman in the Cheongsam said. The steel giant nodded and pondered for a moment before saying, "That's right. Otherwise, why would so many forces from the Shen-Mi heavenly domain send people to the 8 heavens? We can only be considered as the early batch. There will be more cultivators coming to the 8 heavens in the future. Their goal is the so-called land of origin. What's in the origin of the starry sky that made so many powers from Shen-Mi heaven put in so much effort? I remember that the origin of the starry sky only came out recently. Who spread the news?" The woman in the Cheongsam analyzed. "Young lady, your guess is correct. I heard that this news was spread by Traceless Blood. Traceless Blood chased a witch race cultivator hundreds of thousands of years ago and inadvertently entered the 8 heavens. He was trapped in the 8 heavens for hundreds of thousands of years and learned many things about the 8 heavens." The steel's giant said. "Traceless Blood? Is it Traceless Blood from the blood prison?" The woman in the Cheongsam was startled and a trace of disgust appeared in her beautiful eyes. Traceless Blood and the blood prison were notorious forces in Shen-Mi heaven, but at the same time, they were also a force that made people tremble in fear. Because the blood prison was a force that specialized in training assassins. The assassins they trained would kill no one. As long as you could pay them, the blood prison would basically accept the task of killing. They had done many heartless things. The woman in the Cheongsam had always kept a respectful distance from this kind of assassin force, so she naturally didn't have a good impression of the blood prison. "Do you really believe Traceless Blood's words?" The woman in the Cheongsam looked at the steel's giant speechlessly. The steel's red eyes flashed with the brilliance of wisdom as he said in a deep voice, "The blood prison wouldn't dare. If this news was released, it would spread like wildfire. If the news is false, the blood prison will become the target of public criticism. Although the blood prison station is mysterious and is a Tao Palace level force, it can't withstand the condemnation of many forces, so the blood prison won't do such a thankless thing." The woman in the Cheongsam sneered and said, "Since Traceless Blood knows that there is a starry sky source in the 8 heavens, why didn't he investigate it and instead release this news?" "Because he doesn't know the specific location. The reason why he released this news should be because he has the idea that there is strength in numbers. After all, once the starry sky source is discovered, no force in Shen-Mi heaven can swallow it. It will inevitably be divided. The blood prison is not weak, so when the time comes, they will naturally be able to get a share of it," the steel's giant said lightly. "Hooah!" Suddenly, a noise sounded in front of the stone steely, attracting the attention of the woman in the Cheongsam and the steel's giant. After that, both of them noticed with surprise that the stone steely that stood at the center of the assignment hall was emanating a dazzling yellow light at this moment. Moreover, at the moment the yellow light arrived at its most blazing, it suddenly transformed into an azure color, and then the azure color changed once more to brown. In the end, The light stopped at brown before slowly being extinguished. This is an earth-rank ancestral Dao root? The woman in the Cheongsam muttered with a voice that was filled with disbelief. The steel's giant was shocked as well. However, his entire body was made of steel, and the only thing that revealed his emotions was his red eyes. Young miss, looks like a genius with an earth-rank ancestral Dao root can appear in the 8 heavens. We can't let such a genius go. The steel's giant spoke hurriedly. The woman in the Cheongsam nodded. There was no need for the steel's giant to speak before she'd already flashed towards the stone stele, and in next to no time, she arrived around the stone stele. Only now did she see clearly that it was a young woman who'd been tested to possess an earth-rank ancestral Dao root. This woman was extremely beautiful. Moreover, the space between her brows revealed a heroic aura, and it caused her entire body to emanate an extraordinary aura. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,